So good news, Mike.
What's that?
I meditated.
Hey, good job.
Hey, bad news, Mike.
What's that?
I still don't get it. I might understand where I'm doing wrong, though.
Okay.
I shouldn't say doing wrong, though. I think part of what I do whenever I do this experiment of meditation is I always do it in the morning. And I always do it as part of my morning ritual. Like, I always slip it in there. It's always going the exact same spot, which is what I did this morning. So I think I did it 3 times. Yeah, the last 3 days I've done it, and I still don't. Yeah, nothing there. I think instead of doing it at that point in time, because I think what happens, I'm going to try this tomorrow. So we should talk about this next time, because I still feel like I'm missing something here. And I think...
Yeah, we can put it on follow-up a 4th time if you want.
I don't want to know how many times this action item has gone around and around and around. I think what I'm doing is, by meditating in the morning, I am already quite clear-headed at that moment. Like, I've already done a lot of things that are borderline meditative as it is. Like, before I ever get to the time when I'm going to meditate, I've already had breakfast. I've done my morning Bible reading. I've spent some time in prayer, which you could probably argue that is a meditation in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll come downstairs and go through this process of trying to clear my head when I've already done some things that probably help in the same direction. I think that might be why I never noticed anything with this. That's my current theory as of about 15 minutes ago. So it's just because I was reading through this thinking, I suppose I need an explanation on this. And I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think that theory makes sense, though.
Seems logical. So I think what I'm going to do tomorrow for this, so this can, meditation can be on Joe's follow-up list for the 18th time next week or next couple weeks. I think what I'm going to try doing is not doing it first thing in the morning, but waiting until like mid-morning, like say 10 a.m., whenever I've already been fighting fires, I've been heads down on some things at work, and then take a 10-minute break and go meditate. I'm going to try that and see if that break in the day makes a big difference or not. That's my thought.
It's a good idea. I like it.
We'll see if it sticks. But for now, I still think it's a hokey thing at the moment.
My money's on no. But I do think that this is giving it the best chance it's ever going to have becoming a part of your routine.
Yeah. I will say that if that doesn't sell me on it, I think I should just quit trying.
Sure.
Like, it's just not. But I'm sure at some point we'll read a book on meditation, and we'll read 10% Happier, and then I'll want to try it again. That's the way this works.
Yeah, so everybody go vote for that if you want to force Joe to...
Oh, come on.
to make this part of his daily routine.
Ugh. All right. Can I get off this one now? All right.
Yep.
I'm going to go into something else. Let's go into something much more, fun. I don't know. Don't use email as a to-do list. Let's just put this as #fail 2.0. Like that. Yeah. Still doing this, Mike. Sorry.
Come on.
Sorry, not sorry. I know. The problem is that I realized that there's so much of my email that comes in that it's not worth the time to put it into OmniFocus and then come back and do it later. It's better to just let it sit there for the next 10 minutes and then cycle them when I get to them. But sometimes I get drawn away and I don't get back to it, so I get that. So it does seem to work to some degree. I get that I really shouldn't, but it kind of works to some degree. So I don't know if I want to say I don't want to do this, or if it needs to go on follow-up again next time. I don't know. I don't know what to do with it.
Well, here's the thinking time question that I'm going to throw out to you right now,
okay.
as we're going to be talking about Scrum in a little bit here. A key tenet of Scrum is removing impediments so that the work can get done faster. Now, I guarantee that email is an impediment to the way that you work. So the thinking time question would be, how can you remove email as an impediment or an obstacle to getting your work done quicker? I'm sure that if you view it through that lens, you can find a better way to do it. Like, I have no doubt that the way that you're doing it now works, just like the waterfall method, which we'll talk about in a little bit, works, quote unquote, works. Dang it, I said quote unquote. Sorry,
okay,
reviewer.
I do it intentionally at this point.
But you get what I'm saying? Like, it's something that you've kind of resigned yourself to the fact that I have to do this, and so I'm going to do it, and it's really not that bad, so I'm just going to keep doing it the way that it's going to be doing it. But Scrum, if you really implement this, kind of forces you to rethink the entire way that you work. And so I would just challenge you to think about email through that lens as well.
So one thing you said there was that email being an impediment to the work. What if email is the work itself?
Well, email can be the work that itself, but going into the inbox is an impediment to the work itself. So what is the most efficient way that you can get the things that are in your email into whatever way you need to work? So I don't know, whatever system. I know last time, or actually not last time, I think via text message, you were telling me that you were checking out Jira and Atlassian and stuff like that. So
right.
I don't know, maybe you get your customers, and this is going to sound ridiculous if you've never done this, but maybe you have your customers or your clients involved in your Jira boards. I mean, that's a key element of Scrum too, is that the customers are involved in the production of the work. So I'm sure there's options. I'm not sure that they will be better than what you're currently doing, but I think it's worth considering them. Yeah. Especially as it pertains to email.
Yeah. I don't know if, like, for example, I've cycled 100 emails already today. It's 1:00 in the afternoon as we're recording this. So I've cycled a lot of email already. And I don't know that, because I do this in intervals, it's not like I'm sitting here with my inbox open all day long. Like, I can't say that email has become an impediment in that way. But I know that, like, for example, I've got, I don't even know how many's in there right now, because I was running through email just a little bit before we jumped on here. And I know that I left at least 12 things on the list in my inbox that I'll get to when we're done recording here. Because I know I'm going to be coming back into my email at that point, and it's very likely that I'm going to clear those out in their entirety whenever I get to it. So knowing that, overarching amount of time that I spend on those items would be greater if I were to move it into, say, a flagged folder or an action folder or into OmniFocus with a link. Like, the processing time is greater, and like the overall time is greater if I do something with those rather than just get to them when I come back to it. Does that make sense? Like, I'm looking at the overall time.
But you're going to force me to talk about Scrum right now, aren't you?
Okay, well, we can quit talking about this and come back to it, I guess.
Well, here's one final thought, and then we'll put a pin in this. So email is a to-do list that other people can write on. Every email that you get is an item in your backlog. And as we talk about in this book, the job of the product owner is to go through the backlog and select the things that are of highest value. If your goal is to get everything out of the inbox, you are assuming that whatever time you're going to be spending going through those messages, that those messages are the things of highest value. And you really can't make that judgment until you know how much story points those are bringing or how much monetary value they're bringing to the company or the organization. You get what I'm saying? Like, you have to have a way of measuring those things rather than just, I got to get to zero because that's what my clients expect. And I know that's making it way too simple, but ultimately, like, that's the approach. And then how you get to that point, that's where things get really hard.
All right. I'm looking forward to pulling the pin out.
Okay.
So the other one I've got on this list is looking into distraction blockers for my Mac and my iPhone. I did look into it. The only one that seemed like it was anywhere remotely worth my time was Freedom, which people have talked about, but it's currently pulled off the iOS store. Like, it's off the App Store right now.
Because you can't do that on iOS.
Well, you can, because other people do it for different reasons. They just have lumped Freedom in on the people who abuse because they use a VPN to do it.
Yep.
And which works really well, but Apple lumped them in with some people who were abusing VPNs on that, and it sounds like they're in the middle of a big conversation with Apple trying to show how they are different than the people that abuse it. So
VPNs on iOS has always felt like a house of cards that was waiting to be blown over, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah. though it's a pretty big deal because like I know some folks who, like one of which is a police officer, and like his company, like the department issue phone has a VPN on it, like that. I know that that's a big deal to them. Mm-hmm. So I know it's a thing that Apple supports to some extent and is perfectly happy with. I just think they have issues when, you know, other services start using VPNs in order just to enable like one-off personal uses. Like they're okay with it if it's a company, but if it's for personal use in any way, it seems like that's where it starts to get a little dicey.
Which makes sense from Apple's perspective, too. I mean,
yeah,
you can kind of assume, I guess, that Freedom has been around for a while and they have noble intentions, and it's not just some guy who's stealing information. And
yeah,
but it does open the door to that sort of thing. And I do not envy the people on the app review team. You hear all the time about these things that have just like snuck through, and then it takes them even half a day to get rid of those things. And I think they actually do a pretty good job of getting them off the store as quickly as they do. But by the time they get through, Mac Stories has written about it and a bunch of other places. And now like there's this whole brouhaha in the Apple community. But oh my gosh, Apple's App Store review, as strict as they are, how in the world did this get through? You know, so they're going to err on the side of caution.
Right. Anyway, Freedom was the one that I was looking at. However, time, end of the day came around. I just decided this is not a thing for me. Like, I just don't think distraction blockers are a thing I need to put in place, because I started just paying attention to like, how much time do I goof off on my Mac or my iPhone. It's actually quite small. So like every once in a while, I'll goof off on YouTube for 15 minutes or so, but I'm not one of those that tends to get lost on it for an hour and a half. That's not a thing I think I personally struggle with. So I don't know.
Check your screen time. It'll tell you for sure.
My fun side note, my screen time stats are completely worthless. And I figured that out.
Oh yeah, I think I heard you talk about this on Whims.
Yeah, it's okay. So as I'm pulling it up right now, just so I could see what I've got on it. Yeah. So today, again, it's just after 1:00 in the afternoon. I have been on my phone for 6.5 hours. That's what this says. Productivity apps on this are 6 hours and 23 minutes. So it's like, why is that, Joe? It's because I leave OmniFocus open all the time. Like I use OmniFocus as a to-do list, and I tend to just leave it open on my phone sitting on my desk or next to me almost all day long. So yeah, it doesn't do a whole lot of good. But it does tell me how much time I spend on the other stuff as well. So I have to drill down. Like I can't look at the big number because it's completely, distorted. So I can drill down on it. And those numbers are pretty good. Like I spend somewhere around 20, 30 minutes a day on things other than OmniFocus, which I feel like is pretty good. So I don't know. I don't know that this is a thing that I need to continue pursuing. It's a fun idea. Sorry, Chris Bailey, but this is not a thing I think I'm gonna spend a whole lot of time focusing on and trying to figure out. So I'm gonna just say done on that one.
All right, fair enough. I guess that leaves me, and I went back and listened to this to make sure that I phrased this the way that I thought I phrased it, and I did. So I'm going to check this off as completed because I had said to consider the doors and choose whether I wanted to close any of them. Current state of affairs in the Mike Schmidt's world, I'm not closing any doors yet. But I do think this is a very healthy perspective. And I've got a couple things kind of flagged as keep an eye on this and see where it goes. And it's quite possible that those things 3 months from now are going to be doors that will be closed. The way I plan on implementing this long-term follow-up would be when I do my personal retreats every couple months. I ask myself those questions. What should I start doing? What should I stop doing? What should I keep doing? And I make myself choose something to stop doing. I've basically got a couple things that are on the chopping block for when I do my next personal retreat. But no doors are closing as of this moment. Fun side note, by the way, if I could put in a a selfless promotion plug here.
I was hoping you would.
Okay. We were talking before we hopped on here. I have my video course, Faith-Based Productivity, available for pre-order. And until the course is ready, which should be about the beginning of the year, I have a 50% discount on that course plus another course on how I do my personal retreats. So if you want to get both of those courses plus a couple of coaching calls with me, you can check that out at faithbasedproductivity.com. It's $197 as opposed to $397 after the pre-order once the course is available for all of that stuff. You can always get just the course at $197, but kind of what I'm doing is for people who want to support me in the development of this thing, you jump in early and you get some free bonus stuff, including the personal retreat stuff. So that'll include not only the questions, but also like the templates that I use, the Wheel of Life, stuff like that. So PDF resources that people can use as well. Okay, I hate doing self-promotion, so exiting soapbox.
Well, one of the questions I had for you, because I'm not going to let you get away from this that quick, was, you were going through this process of figuring out which doors that you were going to close. But through that process, did you look at doors that you needed to open? And is this one of those? Because I know that you've been talking about this faith-based productivity course for, at least with me, you and I have been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah.
To some degree or another, even from its, wait, I had this really cool idea. Like, even from that point, you and I have had discussions about it. But was this something that didn't even enter into that because it was already moving forward, so it didn't even get considered as something to close? Or was it something that as part of this you realized you needed to open that door?
You mean the door for faith-based productivity specifically?
Yes. Yep.
This was one of the things that I always kept the option open, going back to Predictably Irrational, where they wanted to keep all of the doors open. That's kind of what I was doing with faith-based productivity, but I never gave it the time and attention that it deserved for it to get off the ground. And then when I found myself not working with agent efficiency anymore, I had the time to devote to this. So I've been cranking on this thing. I've been creating workbook content. I have been doing everything basically except the videos. Those are out of my hands because my brother, who's a really, really good video and audio guy, is helping me with that stuff. So I'm basically trying to get everything else that I need for the course done. And then as the videos get done, I'll release everything as it's available. But I accidentally sold one the other day. I say accidentally because I haven't announced it anywhere other than, this podcast now. But and that is because there's nothing there if you were to log into it right now. So I didn't want someone to have a bad first experience, pay me $200 for the course, log in, see nothing there. I didn't have any email sequences set up for the coaching calls or anything. My scheduler wasn't set up. So all of a sudden I saw this name come in and I'm like, oh crap. So I spent all Friday afternoon trying to create something that I could give to somebody who might purchase this thing. So now the scheduler is there and there's a welcome email that you get and stuff like that. But so you can book the coaching calls right away, and then the content, like I said, is going to be released as soon as it's available. And then once it's all available, then the pre-order deal is going to go away. And like I said, I think that'll be about the beginning of the year.
Sure.
So long-winded version of answering your question, that this was a door that I knew I needed to walk through at some point. And then state of circumstances being that what they are, it's like, okay, now is the time to do this. And I've gotten a lot of encouragement from people, yourself, Sean Blanc, David Sparks, a lot of people I really respect who have encouraged me that, this actually could be successful. I have had trouble believing that this could be big, but I've had a couple people who have encouraged me and shown me, help shape or shift my perspective on this thing. So we're going to give it a shot. And it's available now. Well, the pre-order is available now.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I think it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. And I need to go through this too. So yes, it'll be fun. Anyway.
All right.
I'll let you, I'll let you move on from here. So anyway, today's book, I can tell that we're both a little excited about this one because we keep trying to bring it up. But I'll let you introduce it.
Sure. This is Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, which is the most clickbaity title I have ever heard.
Exactly.
By Jeff Sutherland and JJ Sutherland, which I think Jeff is the guy who's the co-creator of Scrum, and then JJ is his son. So these guys definitely know what they're talking about. I do want to preface this book, though, because there's a lot of great stuff in here. But did you happen to read any of the Amazon reviews for this book?
Yep.
Okay. So there's there's one in here. Now I can't find it. But there's one where they basically said if you believe Jeff Sutherland, he's personally responsible for basically saving the world, all these different things.
Yeah.
And that definitely comes through in the book, but there is a lot of great information here. So we're going to save you the what's the word? Like Jeff Sutherland thinks he's pretty great stuff, and he can save any company or organization from anything. So we're going to save you all of that and just tease out the valuable bits here from the book.
That's the idea. Yeah, Jeff is a very confident man.
Yes.
You can pick that up very quickly. Just as an example, he mentions how a lot of times he'll talk about how, well, when I came up with Scrum, and he'll go into all the stuff about it, but he's the co-creator. If you were to, if you didn't read that on the cover of the book, you wouldn't know that someone else helped him in the creation of that. You wouldn't know that there's another co-creator with Scrum. So just reading the book, he claims 100% ownership of that and believes that coming up with it was the absolute best thing that's happened to humanity since its inception. So yes, we don't need to go into that anymore. I'm sure it'll come up more when we get into like this whole rating process. But yeah, it's definitely a thing to be aware of. If you go read this, that will happen. I just kind of ignored it after a while. It's like, okay, here we go again.
Yeah, it happens so much that you can tune it out about halfway through the book.
Yeah, you can.
And I do want to say, like, he does have a lot of notches on his belt. So he probably is validated in saying a lot of this stuff. But talking about author style, I guess at the beginning, it does get a little old. And it's not as simple as we'll just implement Scrum and everything is going to change overnight, which is kind of the narrative that's told over and over and over again through all these different stories.
Right.
So anyways, jumping in here with chapter 1.
Yes.
The way the world is broken. And this chapter basically just outlines how the traditional methods of project management don't work. The key comparison here is the Scrum method, which we're going to unpack over the rest of this episode, and he unpacks over the next, 8 chapters, versus the traditional waterfall method.
Yeah.
And it's called the waterfall method. I heard somebody describe it one time because you pick a date and time in the future, you pick your budget, and then you move towards the edge of the waterfall and hope you don't go over.
I've not heard that, but that works.
Yeah. Problem with that is that they're based on these Gantt charts. And as he says on page 5, the only problem with Gantt charts is that they are always, always wrong. And this is very true. He used a couple examples in here, but I've heard of other examples and other discussions of Scrum that I've read over the years, like the Denver airport, the Sydney Opera House, where people said it's going to take 6 months and $10 million, and then it takes 6 years and $200 million. That's pretty common with this traditional project management approach. And so Scrum is a completely different way of working, where instead of picking a date for the project to be complete, you're going to work in these shorter periods of time called sprints. And you're going to select the things that are going to provide the greatest value towards the project. You're going to crank on those at the end of the sprint, whether it be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. You're going to evaluate the work that you got done, and you're going to go through a retrospective so that you can get better for the next time. And there's a lot in that short description, but is that a fair introduction to Scrum?
Yeah, I would say so, because Scrum is like a... I don't know how to explain that, but agile is the term that a lot of people tend to call it. There are other versions of agile out there. Scrum is a specific within that.
Yep.
So Scrum and agile they get their origins in software development, and waterfall is seen heavily, like that's considered like a software development style.
That waterfall method, by the way, he mentions that was actually based off of trench warfare from World War I in this first chapter, which I thought was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of a crazy idea. I didn't really know that, but that's kind of interesting. But yeah, Scrum and Waterfall, like they come out heavily in development, which of course I work in. So that means that these are things that I live and breathe a lot. So, the waterfall method, like the way I've always thought of it is whenever you look at the Gantt charts, like you have a line at the top and then it drops down to the next step and then it goes across and it drops down to the next step. Well, with waterfall, you go through a process of figuring out all the details about what you need to do. And then you spec out how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. Then you go through a process of building the entire product. Then you drop down into testing and bug fixing, and then you release it. And it's all done single steps until the thing is released. The problem is that you run into scenarios the whole time with budget and how long it's going to take because you don't, like the specs probably should change as you go, but they don't because you've already done all of the hard work of speccing it up front. So people throw a fit whenever you go to change it. That's part of what he's getting at whenever he says the way the world is broken.
Yep. And then there's project creep and all that other stuff.
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, that, now that I see that, it reminds me that we need these 3 features. Well, that's not part of the spec, so now we need to do a change request, which adds all kinds of overhead and it drives up the cost. So there's even shops that do who know this, that whenever they quote things, they actually quote it as at a loss, because they know that if they win the bid, there will be nothing but change requests in order to get what they want, and that's where they make their money. So
dirty dogs.
That is a way that people do business. It does exist. Whereas I like to compare Waterfall to Scrum and Agile by taking the Waterfall method that you're used to, each of those steps from beginning to end, but you condense them down into like a 1 or 2 week period and do that whole process a whole bunch of times until you're done. Like that's the way that I like to think of it. That's a gross exaggeration of it for sure, especially if you read this book. But again, you can tell I know a lot about this and I'm fairly passionate about it, but it's because I work in web development. So these styles are things I live and breathe. So yes, which means I'm probably going to be fairly lively today. I apologize.
No apologies needed. I should also, I guess, at the beginning here, kind of reference my perspective and experience with Scrum too, because this is something that I had no experience with before I started working with the agent efficiency team. But agent efficiency is all in with Scrum, and people would look at me weird when I would tell them we use Jira at agent efficiency, because they're like, isn't that for software development? You guys don't develop software. But really it's just it's a Scrum tool basically. And I say Scrum, maybe a better term would be Agile tool, but I know you started using Jira and it's built for this. So I learned a lot from working with the agent efficiency team and the way that they've implemented Scrum, but there's lots of different ways that you can do this. I do think that agent efficiency's implementation was pretty much to the book. There's a couple areas where we did things a little bit differently, which I'll point out as we go through here. But it's not like I'm implementing Scrum with a whole bunch of clients. It's just been the way that the company that I've been working with the last several years has gotten things done. And it's kind of ruined me, I have to say. Scrum is so much better than the traditional task management approach, especially when you're working with a smaller team.
Right.
We'll get into chapter 3 is all about teams, so we'll get to that in a minute. But
for sure.
Yeah, so Scrum is Agile, but Agile is not necessarily Scrum. I don't know exactly what the difference is. I do know that Scrum is based off of the idea from rugby where you huddle up, then you get to the line, and then everybody has the scrum, and then when it's done, like you go back and you regroup. So that's kind of where it got its name. He does call out the 4 values of Agile in this first chapter too, which are people over process, products that actually work over documenting what the product is supposed to do, collaborating with customers over negotiating with them, and then responding to change over following a plan. So you can see right away, you were talking about how using the waterfall method, you send out the contract, you maybe do it at a loss because you know there's going to be a bunch of change orders. Like the agile values are just turning that completely on its head.
Yeah, because essentially what you're trying to do with agile is get something in your end user's hands as soon as you can to try getting feedback as quickly as you can. It's all about a feedback loop.
Yep.
It's not about trying to turn out a product. It's about
exactly
iterating your way towards the correct answer at the end of the day.
Exactly. And then a couple other key tenets here. You want to figure out what's slowing your team down and eliminate. You don't want to work more. You want to work smarter.
Yes.
And then also in this section, there's that joke about the chicken and the pig.
Yep.
And I do think that it fits here, though. So the joke goes that the chicken and the pig are going to open up a restaurant, and the pig says, "No way, you're involved, but I'd be committed." And really, what makes Scrum work is people being committed to the process, not just involved in it. I've been in other places that have toyed around with the idea of implementing Scrum, like, oh, we'll just try it, and at that point you're involved with the process, but unless you really commit to it, it's really not going to work. And it can't just be one person either. It's got to be the team. So we'll say that, at the beginning here before we dive into the specifics.
Yeah, I know that, I had a conversation because, this is what one of the fun parts about Bookworm is you find yourself, at least I do, I carry my book with me in a lot of places. Well, I had this with me when I was at the church doing some IT work on a Tuesday, and one of the leaders of the church saw it, and then it sparked a whole conversation. And I don't know that it'll go anywhere, but it was this conversation around, could the church use Scrum
Yep.
as a way of just managing all of the daily operations and everything that happens throughout the week at the church?
Yes, you could.
It's like, well, yes, absolutely. There are churches who do that. So it was just kind of an interesting conversation because, the values that come behind it, you could easily apply in a lot of places, not just software development.
Yep. Absolutely. And that's kind of why I referenced that Amazon review at the beginning. That was the reviewer's beef with the book, he's basically taking credit for the successful implementation of this in all these different arenas. He's like, look what I did.
Yeah.
Well, no, you provided the framework, but the people actually did the work. And he did, kudos to him for the framework or co-framework, I guess, because he's the co-founder of Scrum.
See, he's infected us. We think it's him alone.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But the hard part is in implementing it. I can tell you that. In fact, in the next chapter, the origins of Scrum, there's this Shu Ha Ri that I put down here. These are the different levels of mastery. So Shu is the first level where you know all the rules and the forms. And at that level of mastery, you follow it to the letter of the law. And then Ha is the middle one. There you've mastered the forms and you can start to make innovations. You can start to change things for the way that you want to work. And then Ri is the top level where you're able to discard the forms entirely because you've mastered the practice and you're able to be creative while being unhindered. It takes a while to get to that point. And that is really where the magic happens with the implementation of Scrum. It takes a while for you to start for you to recognize what are the pieces that you need to have these and what are the places where you can kind of bend the rules, so to speak. And he doesn't get into all the details of all the different situations that he worked at, and I don't know how long the process was before people went from Shu to Ha to Ri and then back again, because there were several examples where he said, okay, once they got what they needed and their feet were no longer held to the fire, they went back to doing things the old way, which is kind of ridiculous. This works so well, we better stop. But I guess my point I'm trying to make here is that for the results to really happen, you have to get to that top level. And I kind of think that you can't work with a consultant for 6 months and get there. Even if you did bring in Jeff Sutherland, and as great as he is, I don't think he can get your team there in that short a period of time. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just my gut feeling.
Yeah, I think it'll take time. It would take, I think, at least a handful of months, if not longer, to fully get to the Ri side of things. Just because it's not simple. Like it's hard to get to that level. Like I know that, like for me, having worked with a lot of clients who are under Agile principles, and even Procourse, our company, we've got it fully implemented at this point. Like, this is a thing that I'm very familiar with and know all the details, but it's not a thing that you're going to put in place and then in a week, like it's just second nature. That's not the way it is. Like it gives you a framework, but I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is in the process of considering implementing this personally, which I think we're going to talk about a little later, like how you could do that. But one note that he pointed out was that Agile, like running Scrum personally, has a ton of flexibility with it. Yes, there's a lot of structure to it, but it's incredibly flexible as far as like what you're doing and how you go about doing it throughout the day. So a lot of productivity frameworks, at least, tend to try to lock you into certain structure, which may or not be a good thing, but when you get into Scrum and really start implementing it, it does come with a lot of ability to move around and move quickly. So that's the nice part about it.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go back real quickly and mention just on the topic of getting up to speed with this stuff. I have a friend who is a certified Scrum teacher, and he hosts these different workshops for the different Scrum roles. So you can attend a workshop on being a Scrum Master, a product owner, whatever, and there's multiple levels for these all-day workshops. He actually, by the way, at the moment is not hosting those workshops because I believe he's working with Toyota in Texas. So they mentioned Toyota as kind of like the birthplace for a lot of this stuff in this book. A lot of the ideas can be traced back to the Toyota way.
Right.
And having anybody being able to stop the line and fix the thing that's going wrong, remove the impediments, and then they're able to crank out a lot more cars and a lot more higher quality, a lot less errors by doing things that way. So the fact that you can, as a person in a different role, attend many of these different workshops, these all-day trainings, which will teach you the principles at, I think there's like 3 or 4 different levels. Like that kind of tells me that there is a lot to implement here, and it's not the kind of thing where like you attend it all day and there's 2 things that you're going to take away from there, and then you're going to go implement that, and then you can come back the next day and you can do the next level. My understanding of this stuff, and from talking to him, I actually interviewed him for the productivity show. I think it was episode 189. His name is Judah Smith. We can link to that in the show notes if people want to go back and listen to that episode. But there's just so much there, and I kind of think like there's a limit on the amount of information that the human brain can take in, synthesize, and then put into action. And then when you talk about having to do that with everybody on the team, like there's no way this is happening fast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it seems like the more people you put in a room trying to come up with solutions on things, the less you get done.
Right.
To a point. It just kind of seems that's the way it works. So, yes, that's where systems like this really come in helpful, but can be helpful because they give you a lot of the like the connecting points that are designed to be incredibly efficient.
Yep.
So yeah, I know. Like when we do at ProCourse, when we do our sprint calls, we combine a handful of the meetings that you're supposed to have with Scrum and do them all at one time. So, and there's some reasons for that. Like, again, if you know the whole system and you know the intent of all the different steps, you can break some of those rules.
Yep.
Which is what we do. So, that's, I am far from a person who's going to come in here and say, yeah, you got to do these 3 meetings and you got to do it this way. Like, no, like I break a lot of those rules. So,
right.
Whoops. Sorry, Jeff.
A lot of the different meetings, though, do come back to the same approach, which he introduces based on his experience as an Air Force pilot. So in the Air Force, they have training on how to control risk, and there's 4 different things. I think you pronounce this OODA, O-O-D-A. The first O is observe. The second O is orient. The D is decide. And then the A is act. And he matches that up with something that a guy named J. Edwards Deming introduced called PDCA. And this is plan, do, check, and act. And that really is the key idea behind how to implement Scrum. So you can have your sprint meeting, you can have a separate retrospective if you want, but really this is the cycle that you want to make sure that you're hitting with your meeting cadence, is that you are planning the work that you are going to do. You are doing the work, you're checking the work and reviewing it to make sure that it's free from errors. And then you are releasing it to the public. You are getting it to customers. And then, like you said, there's that feedback loop so that you're getting feedback and you know what things to prioritize from the backlog as you plan the next sprint. That's really the important thing to implement.
Yeah. When you were thinking about this, did you consider GTD at all? Like getting things done in the framework and how that applies to this?
No, I did not.
Okay. I couldn't help myself.
My initial thoughts, though, and then it'll be interesting to hear you correct me, is that GTD does not lend itself to this at all, because GTD, there is no deciding. You're just following the tree and putting the things in the right buckets. And if it takes less than 2 minutes, you're going to do it, which is why you may find yourself just cranking through emails, because it's going to take less than 2 minutes to do it. It's automatically at the top of the backlog. And I don't think that's the right approach. But yeah, so what am I missing?
I think these two are perfectly complementary. And it's because the levels at which they operate are, in my opinion, perfectly aligned, because GTD helps me with like getting things into the backlog, the list of things that need to be done, and helping me create some form of a structure around it, like making decisions about each of those items and spelling them out in the detail that I need. Like, it helps me get those done. But one of the places that I feel like people struggle with it is the review process. It's like, okay, well, once a week I should sit down and review my system. Well, that's where I think Scrum steps in, because you set up your week ahead of time, and we'll go into some of the details of how this actually operates here. But when you set up your sprint, especially if you set it up with a 1 week sprint, and you're choosing all of the backlog items that you're going to do within that week, it's kind of like that's what you should be doing with GTD anyway, but it's not spelled out at that level because it doesn't operate at that level. Like, it's one level above that. So I feel like with Scrum, it gives you the framework that you need to operate at the weekly level, or the every 2 week level, the biweekly level. You know, it gives you some of that and gives you the check-ins and such to keep you moving in the right direction, but it also helps you keep from overloading yourself. So that's where I feel like Scrum steps in. So to me, I feel like they fit each other perfectly, but I can also see how people would look at it and say, well, you know, that doesn't actually add up. I'm sure it breaks down in some places, but I'm not one that's going to get caught up in details. So, you know, for me, the way that I've currently got some of my pieces spelled out, like, they work in conjunction with each other, and it's pretty nice. Not going to lie. I like it. So yes, I like the two together.
I'll worry about the details for you.
Okay, go for it. You go for the details. I'll be over here getting things done while you worry about getting things done.
Okay, so the basic tenet of getting things done, you've got that flow chart, which is pretty famous, right? And you've got the things that are in your inbox, and then as you go through the checklist, as you move it through the funnel, at some point you have to decide whether you want to put this thing off to the future, which, if you're going to be doing that alone and you take out the 2-minute rule piece of this, then maybe I could see how this applies. But if it takes less than 2 minutes, you're supposed to do it. That rule right there shows me that GTD is built on the concept of efficiency, okay? Where I think Scrum is built on the concept of effectiveness. So GTD would tell you, whatever you're looking at that particular moment, if it takes less than 2 minutes to do, that's the thing that you should be doing right now. That's the thing you should be doing first. But Scrum is going to say what will bring the most value to the project and do that first. And so I think if you follow GTD to the letter of the law, then you will find yourself in a position where GTD is telling you to do one thing because it's the most efficient way of cranking through the things that you have to do. And that can be at odds with the letter of the law for Scrum. So not saying you can't reconcile those two, but that's my issue with GTD, is that fundamentally I think it is based on getting through things as quickly as possible without even considering whether these are the right things to be doing. Now, there is a part of that GTD tree where if it's something you don't need, then you delete it. But what if it's something that you might need? You're going to put it in your reference file. You're going to put it in your task manager, and you're going to make a decision about it at some future point in time. So the fact that you can't make a decision on this thing isn't the right thing for right now without sending it to another place and then making a judgment on it in context with all the other things that you have to do, that's the thing that I think makes GTD not so great from an effectiveness standpoint. And I'm not doing a great job of explaining this, but I will say that when you are implementing Scrum, it's very clear what the thing of most value is. And so when you get something that shows up in front of you and it's not in alignment with the thing that's going to provide the most value, it's a lot easier to say, oh yeah, I'm not even going to worry about that right now. I think that's a big piece to me being able to say, yeah, I'm just going to suck at email because I know that email is not going to be in alignment with the thing that is the most important. Now, your situation's a little bit different, so it's a little bit harder to separate those things. But do you get what I'm saying? I think GTD is, if you were to just follow it as a system, like you mentioned, the productivity frameworks, and this is why I'm kind of done with frameworks because people will say, this is the way to do it. All you got to do is follow these 5 steps. You know, my Gap book for last time, I just sent out the book notes via the newsletter for your best year ever, 5 different sections. And each one of those chapters is broken down into, sections broken down to 3 different chapters. Like, it's such a framework, and it's like, just do this, then this, then this, then this. And it's never that simple. But I do think that Scrum does a better job than pretty much any other framework I've seen of keeping the main thing. Because you constantly have to be asking that question, especially if you're a product owner, is what are the things that are really going to provide the 80% of value for the 20% of the effort? And then even taking that a step further, there's a whole concept of like the minimum viable product, the MVP, where what's the quickest thing we can get done and move it out the door. When you view your tasks through that lens, it's a game changer.
So there's a fundamental element of this that I think completely changes everything you just said. And that is time. And especially in my case, like I operate off of, like, it's not a matter of I'm going to work on everything that comes in. That's not the case. I delete a lot of email that I never touch. That's not the way that operates. I set a time limit on it because I know that it's not like it involves client communications, which is super high value for me. Like that is a fundamental. This has to get done, or the business does not operate. Like that's what email is to me. So I know that me processing my inbox or leaving things in my inbox to work on later, that is something that. It's easy for me to say that is high value. Like, that is just inherently the way it is. Not all of it. There are pieces that come in, like, that is junk. That does not need to be here. And granted, whenever I give out my email numbers, that's post all the filters. Like, that's getting all of the newsletters and all the other stuff out of my inbox. It's things that are sent directly to me that I need to respond to. Those are the numbers I tend to share. So, when I'm going through that, those are things that, number one, I'm setting a time limit on it. It's usually 30, 40 minutes somewhere in there that I'll spend on it 2 or 3 times a day whenever I'm processing that. And when I'm not on that, that's when I'm operating on, say, in this case, it would be Scrum. Like, I'm operating off of the boards for the company such that I'm processing and working on client projects or working on the long-term strategic pieces because we've spelled out what we're doing over the week and pulling in pieces that help do some of our long-term strategic goals versus some of our short-term, we just got to get this done sort of thing. Like, we're able to break that out. That's where I think Scrum helps out quite a bit. But as far as like the GTD, processing inboxes, yeah, sometimes it goes into the backlog. Sometimes it gets done right away. For me, like, yes, there's an efficiency stance of, should I be doing this right now? If the answer is no, then it's probably going to hit a list that I'll get to at some point. If I can do it in 2 minutes or less, usually my brain immediately makes the jump of, should you do it at all? Before I just do it, even though it's, say a minute task, like, should you do it at all? Like, that's usually where my head goes. So this is why I say, I don't think that I get too caught up on all the, like, should you process it that way or not? Should you spend your time trying to be as efficient as you can? I don't know. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm accomplishing the things that are the most important. Like, that's that's what I'm working on. So does email fit that? I don't know. I just know that it's a thing that keeps the business running, and I can get it done. And leaving things in the inbox, although that doesn't follow any of the canons of any productivity system that I know of, like, it breaks a lot of rules, but things get done. That's the important part.
Things get done. Yeah. No, I agree with you. But I think if you were to look at it through a measurement lens of how much are we getting done,
sure,
you're cutting out an essential piece of Scrum. And we just said that you can choose, once you've mastered it, what you're going to keep, what you're going to get rid of. This is the one piece I would argue that you can never get rid of. And that is when you don't send the email tasks to any sort of system, whether it's OmniFocus, Jira, whatever. And sending emails to Jira is completely ridiculous, but I throw it out there just as an example.
People do it.
That you have to have, because you made the argument, so I'm going to pick on you a little bit, that these are going to keep the lights on for the business. They're going to add value to the business. Okay, so that's great. We're going to assume that's true. Then how much value is that adding, and how many story points are we assigning to those? Because the time that you are spending responding to email, whether it's in the most efficient way possible or not, that is taking away effort that you can be spent moving the team's Scrum goals forwards, whether the team is Team Bulig or Team Procourse. You get what I'm saying? So the fact that they never go to any sort of backlog, they just go to the inbox, and then I got to get my inbox to 0. You're removing the backlog grooming piece up from that, and you're basically at that point making the assumption that all of these things are worthwhile. Everything that you at least leave in your inbox after all the rules and deleting things and whatever. And I would challenge the notion that everything that you leave in your email to-do list is actually something that should have action taken on it. Let me give you an example. I have kept emails in my email inbox before, and what I have found is that if I keep emails in my inbox, I will put them off long enough until the point passes when it's no longer important. Okay, and at that point, does something bad happen? Maybe. But a lot of times in the moment, you're like, oh, I have to get back to this person.
Sure.
And then when you don't get back to that person, you're like, oh, nothing bad really happened there. Now, when you're working with clients, it's a little bit different, but maybe not as different as you think. Like maybe the assumptions that we apply to this are a little bit skewed, where the customer is not always right, and Scrum is saying that the customer is right. So, and I know I'm making like contradictory statements here, but my point is still the same, that we want the customers to influence the work, but we don't want to have them just pile up a big list of things that we have to do. You know, Steve Jobs at Apple is probably the most famous example of saying the customer doesn't know what they want. Doesn't mean that they don't get feedback from customers, but you don't just build what the customer is asking for either. You have to dig deeper and figure out what is the real problem they're trying to solve by saying that they want this thing. What was it? Henry Ford saying that if I would given the customers what they want, we'd be driving faster horses.
Yeah.
So there's a balancing act there for sure.
Yeah, I also know that, sometimes we do build things that I think shouldn't be built because we've argued over it. They're still willing to pay for it. And I make sure we set up the structure of the project such that every time we have adjustments or every time they ask for something, it adds to the amount of time we put towards it, which means their bill goes up. Mm-hmm. This is why, if my projects are structured that way, whenever I'm responding to email, it's giving me things that then can go on our backlog, which then equates to billable hours and such so that the company can continue to grow. So
yeah, so the billable hours thing, that's a whole nother can of worms. Let's go there for a minute.
Which is tricky because, okay, let me clarify this, because we do something. I'm not sure I've run across this in any other software development company. Are you familiar with how mechanic hours are billed? Like if you take your car to the shop,
no,
they have a book that tells them how many hours a certain task takes. Whether it's changing the oil or putting new brake pads on your car. They have a number of hours that they charge for those tasks, and it's up to the mechanic to either hit that or do better than that. We've been adopting that same process for our web development. So if you ask us to do, a certain type of integration between two websites, we would tell you that's 15 hours worth of work, and we bill it based on 15 hours. But if we've done it before, we know that we probably actually only have maybe 3 or 4 hours worth of our actual time involved in it, but the value of it is 15 hours. So we would bill based on 15 hours, even though it took us 4. Does that make sense? Like, that's how we tend to do that.
Yep.
Because it's value pricing. It's not time pricing. So I just want to clarify that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let's assume that email is what keeps the lights on, because customers request things via email. You can send out the quotes for the website integration for 15 hours. They say okay, and then the team finishes it in 4 hours, and you make X% because you finished it ahead of schedule. There's an example later in the book of a company that does software development, and they do this like 10 million 12-month project. I think those were the numbers. And they say, we're going to do this via Scrum. And at any point, if you decide that that's good enough, just pay us 20% on the remaining amount, and you can have the software in its current state. So what happened is that they MVP'd it, and they reviewed it after 1 month. The customer wanted some changes. They MVP'd it again. And then after 3 months, the customer decided that this was good enough, and they walked away. So they got their software project, which was initially going to be done in 12 months, for something like 3.2 million instead of 10 million. And he was describing how this is actually a win-win scenario, because it means that the software development firm now has 9 months that they can work on another project, and the percentage markup, whatever, because of that clause at the end where they get the 20% at the end, it caused it to go from like 15% profit to like 60% profit. That is very, very different than how many hours can we bill out,
right? Which
is the traditional way that most people view this.
Yeah.
And you're probably not going to, and I'm not arguing that you should, change the pro course model to what that company did. But I think it's a really interesting example. And I also think that it highlights something, what was that? The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where they talk about think win-win. Like a lot of, especially with client work, I think the tendency can be to, a client work, especially if you're billing by the hour, you're kind of at odds with the client, because the client wants it to get done as quickly as possible so they don't pay as much. And you want to be able to bill as much as you possibly can. So you're working against each other, which,
right.
I don't know. There's different approaches to how to do that. Sean McCabe of SeanWest.com, he in his book Overlap talks about this, and the whole idea of value-based pricing, where you're going to get a percentage of what the final product is worth to the customer. But the basic idea there is that we want that from a company perspective or an independent contractor perspective, is I want to be able to make the most money I can from this job. And that's kind of different from Scrum, but it also requires that you be okay with not knowing what the next thing in the hopper is going to be. Like when I read that story, I thought, well, that's great, assuming that you've got another $10 million project that you can say yes to.
Correct.
So not confessing to have all the answers, but I did like that. I did like that approach to it.
Yeah, and it was one that I definitely, like, I've been having conversations with. I've since hired a guy as a business development manager, so he's been doing a lot of the sales. So part of my get away from email strategy is to let someone else do it. And I won't be dealing with it over time. So I'm in the middle of that transition right now. So there's that point. But the other thing that's involved here is, one, I really love that whole 20% clause. Because in order for that to work, they have to be paying you monthly. So if it's a $10 million project, they're paying you, what's the math work out to? $800,000 a month or so. And they're submitting that payment to you every month. Well, then whatever's remaining on that balance, they would pay you 20% of whatever's left at whatever point they decide to say, we're done, and take the product and walk away from it. Like, that works, but you have to have bigger projects for it. Like, you can't do that on a project that takes 2 weeks. And we do a lot of projects that are 2 weeks long. So it's a thing where, for us, the speed of something like Agile and Scrum is extremely beneficial. But if we do longer term projects, and we have quoted a couple recently that would be like 4 to 6 month long engagements, and we've been trying to work out, it's like, okay, say this is, I don't even know what the numbers are, but say it's a $10,000 project. If we're going to do that $10,000 project over the next 6 months, whatever that math works out to, we could say, if at any point we get to where we could say we're done, then pay us 20% of whatever's left and we'll both walk away. Like, we could do that. So we've been exploring that concept because I really love that story. I thought it was very interesting. But
I like the story. My issue with the story, though, is that you have to be good at both then. You have to be good at estimating waterfall, and you have to be good at executing Scrum. I have not met a company that's been able to do both.
Yep. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, that was the first thing that we struggled with on those when we were trying to figure out how to quote it, was because you have to go through a whole thing of nailing down how much is involved in this, and you have to get a list of the things that they want done up front. And that's not simple. Like, that was the hard part. And that's part of why we started considering this whole mechanics hours thing, because like, there are tasks that we get asked to do often enough that we have built templates internally for our own use to make it quicker, but we price by value. We don't price based on how much time we put into it. So, our ROI is quite a bit higher because of that. But it also means that, it's hard to get the quote to the client when I can say, we're going to do this 4-week project and release it to you in 2 days.
Right, yeah.
Because we could. We could do that, technically speaking. But, the math to them doesn't add up. But it's because we value price.
Yep.
So it gets kind of complicated. So anyway, we spent a long time on this. But it's there are a lot of ways that you can come at this. You can argue me on the email thing, I think, till we're both blue in the face. But
no, I feel a lot better now that you said that you're looking for ways to offload the email.
Yeah, and
ultimately, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion, but it comes back to, are the things that you're doing really the things that only you can do? Right. So there's the things that only you can do. There's the things that you're the best at, and those are the ones that kind of, that's the ground where everybody kind of justifies not delegating it to somebody else. Is like, nobody cares about this as much as I do, or no one can do it as well as I can. Yeah. But that's not true. It's never true. But it's a limiting belief that needs to be crushed. And I've dealt with that myself.
Fun times. I don't even know where we're at on our outline now. We just completely threw it out.
Yeah, let's go to teams. Okay. Chapter 3. So there's a couple things I want to call out here. The first one is fundamental attribution error. And this is an important idea, not just for Scrum teams, but any team. The idea behind this is that when you are blaming others, you find fault with them personally. This kind of comes back to the idea that we judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions. Okay, so when you apply that to teams and somebody screws up, you think that they did it on purpose. All right, now when you are blamed, you notice the situational factors that led to the problem. Okay, so that means that if Joe and I are working on a Scrum team, Joe's supposed to ship something and he doesn't do it. I view it as Joe's a lazy bum. Joe views it as, well, I had all these health issues and all these other things popped up and I just couldn't get it done. And I don't even look at those things. Is that a fair summary of this?
Yeah, I would say so. It's hard for teams to come at things and know who's at fault or who's in charge. Like, it's just a hard thing.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. You don't want to assign fault, because instead of looking for blame and fault, he says on page 65, Scrum rewards positive behavior by focusing people on working together and getting things done. So he makes a point that we're all creatures of the systems that we find ourselves in, and in business specifically, we tend to blame people, not systems, when we should be looking at the ways that we can fix the systems that the people are in.
Yes. I'm not going to argue that, but I'm just saying that, like, teams have a hard time deciding, a name to put on things. Yep. And that's a lot of what he's getting at here. And there's a lot of, like, when you put together, I'm jumping ahead of here a little bit, but when you put together a sprint inside of Scrum, depending on the way you set your team up, you're not actually assigning any of the stories or the tasks to anyone.
Correct.
Because everyone should be fully independent and everybody should be able to do everything that's on that list. So if you set that up in that way, there is no attribution happening. Like it's all about the team accomplishing something collectively. It's not individuals doing something.
Correct. I will push back a little bit on one thing you said there, which is that the things in the backlog anybody can do. That's kind of what we were pushing for at Agent Efficiency, is that we have the skills matrix and everybody has at least a base level skill in Entreport and whatever other systems that happen to be there. But in this chapter, he talks about the characteristics of the best teams in the world. Number one, they're transcendent, so they have a sense of purpose beyond the ordinary. They know why they're doing what they're doing. Number two, they're autonomous. They're self-organizing. They're self-managing. Number three, they're cross-functional. This is the one I want to unpack a little bit. Cross-functional means that you have all the skills to complete the project on the team, not on the individuals. So that means that if you are a part of a web development team, you've got a coder and you've got a designer. Doesn't mean that the coder can design. And I think that that's an important skill or an important distinction, because if you are focusing on getting everybody the skills that they need to do whatever might need to be done, you are neutering people's unique ability. And unique ability, that's one of my Gap books I read a while back. The idea there is find the thing that only you can do. And I really believe that if you got a bunch of people who were functioning in their unique abilities and they were all complementary and they were on the same Scrum team and they were using this to work on a project, man, they could get twice the work done in half the time for sure.
Yeah, or if you've got enough work going on and you've got, 2 or 3 people that can do the same thing, then you can accelerate a certain area. The trick with us is that we are a web development company, but we're a development company. We don't design. Like the designs are given to us.
Yep.
So we don't have a need for that side of it, but we do have people who specialize in servers versus front-end code. Like we do that sort of thing. And definitely those two can complement each other. The trick there is that it is possible for those team members to switch roles. They wouldn't be as good at it, but they can, in a pinch, work on those opposite sides. Like to me, that's important, that you can do that if you absolutely need to, because what that gives you is the ability to understand what the other people are doing.
Yep.
Do I know how to design, like do the actual technical design on a website? Yeah, I know how to do it, and I know like when a site feels like it's designed well. I've looked at enough designs that I could put together a decent design. Could I do that in the same time frame as a legit graphic designer? Absolutely not. Could I do it as well as they do? Absolutely not. Like that is how that tends to, and I think that's what you're getting at, is you want people who have the expertise in those different areas so that they can work together.
Yeah. So I think the best case scenario is, like you said, if somebody who is your designer can't get the work done, somebody else has some level of skill, they can jump in and they can move things forward. That's great.
Correct.
But I'm arguing that that's not what cross-functional necessarily means, because this is something I've heard be thrown out a bunch of times. We need to be a cross-functional team. Everyone's got to be able to do everything. And I think to myself, what a waste of time trying to get everybody up to the same level at what. Okay, so everybody's going to be mediocre at everything. Like that's not what we should be shooting for. We should let people function in their unique ability, the things that they are really good at. And just as an example, that saying that opposites attract with relationships. If my wife and I had the same strengths and the same weaknesses, it diminishes the, what's the word I'm looking for? The not ability, the potential, I guess, for the family. I interviewed at one point on the productivity show David Colby, the guy behind the Colby test. Well, actually, Kathy Colby is the one behind it. He's the CEO of the company, though. And the whole idea there is like the cognitive strengths. And there's lots of different assessments like that. And we used that at Agent Efficiency because we wanted to recognize where there might be friction between people. And I'll just use myself and Zach as an example. Zach was a high quick start. I was I'm blanking on the terms now. I was the thinker. I needed to fact finder. That's what it is. I was a high fact finder. So because those things are kind of inversely related, it meant that there was a lot of friction when Zach and I would work together. Now, there's value in knowing that because we know that it's going to be a little bit harder. We're going to come at things from different perspectives. But if we can get over that, then the end result is going to be better because Zach's going to see things differently than I'm going to see things. And you escape like the echo chamber or the group think on a particular project. That's something that a lot of companies, especially as they have bigger teams, they try to avoid that, because if you get a whole bunch of people who are wired the same way, then you're not going to even consider some of the better options that are available there. That is a cross-functional team, though, is when you have people at opposite ends of the spectrum who are looking at things from different perspectives. It doesn't mean that I need to become a high quick start or Zach needs to become a high fact finder. It means that I'm the fact finder, he's the quick start, and we're going to use those as a team together to land on this is the thing or the things that are going to provide the most value, and we're going to consider all of the options.
I like that. Good job. Well said, Mike.
Cool. Let me throw out a couple other just quick things from this chapter because they're going to be fundamental going forward. This is where he introduces the idea of the Scrum Master. So he tells this story of the New Zealand All Blacks, which is the rugby team, and he uses the analogy of the Scrum Master as being the coach. So the question that the Scrum Master needs to ask all the time is, how can we do what we do better? How can I put the players or the people doing the work in position to be more successful, get more work done? Not that they're driving them to the point of exhaustion or asking them to work harder, longer, whatever. He kind of rails against that later on in this book, which is actually where my action item comes from, my one action item from this book. But it's about removing the impediments. So the Scrum Master typically is the person who is going to be running the sprints. And so I wanted to make sure that we called out that Scrum Master because I'm sure it's going to pop up a little bit later. There's also in this section the concept of the ideal size for a team. So I don't know how many people you have at ProCourse. When I was at Asian Efficiency, I think we had 7 people total. So the ideal size of a team, he says, is 7 plus or minus 2. And he shares some interesting statistics here where he talks about how the more resources actually decrease the velocity or the amount of work that the team is able to get done. He mentions a concept called Brooks' Law, where adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. And he mentioned that a large team would take about 5 times the number of hours to complete a project. So this just kind of blew my mind. And when you think about 7 people on a team, that's not a lot of people. How many people do you have at a ProCourse, and how do you handle this? Or as you grow, how are you planning to handle this?
Yeah, so right now there are 4 of us that operate under this structure, and there's 2 that operate as technical. Like if you want to follow the terminology of Scrum, there are 2 people that operate solely as team members. I operate as the Scrum Master, and then our business development manager operates as the product owner. The trick here is that I tend to flip hats quite a bit, so I operate as a team member as well. I also, because of how I fit in that Scrum Master role, but because I'm also the owner of the company, I have to step up sometimes and operate as a product owner. Again, this breaks a lot of rules with it. I think it only works because I'm pretty good at switching hats as needed through that process. So yes, there's 4 of us. We've had the conversation a handful of times with different clients of, can you handle 4 times the amount of work if we threw it at you? And they're not actually wanting to do that. They just want to know what our capacity is.
Right.
I do have 3 other guys that I have had conversations with that I can bring into that mix at any given time. They've not operated with us at that level yet, but they can. And so we could up that very quickly if we needed to. So that is a thing that we can grow into. But I know that because of the way that we operate, there's enough moving that we have like different sub-projects operating within the company as well. So it'd be very easy for me to say that we got to where we had too many people operating on a team and it was hard to figure out what was going on with clients. We would segment it off into where there's like 2 pools of clients and operate with 2 different teams on 2 different setups. Does that make sense? So that we would have basically 2 different Scrum Masters on that, which might technically be the same person, but I don't know. That's kind of the part I would have to figure out when we get there. But if it got large enough, we would split it into 2 different teams.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The one thing that kind of is a question mark still in the back of my head is assuming that you keep growing, because agent efficiency never got to the point where we needed to break out into separate teams. We did have separate people who dealt with customer success, and I think there was, I'm trying to think of the other boards that we had, training, there's different areas within the company that people are responsible for. But when it comes to what are the things that are moving the company forward, basically everybody was a part of this growth hacking team, which there's that term growth hacking that so many people love. But I think it really applies to the Scrum model, because hacking kind of implies like you're doing these little things that are going to produce big results. And that's all you do with Scrum, is you make small adjustments and remove those impediments, and then things get faster. But I kind of wondering, like, if you were to use Jira like we did at Agent Efficiency, and you had 2 different teams now who were responsible for achieving the one big goal for the company, how does that work, and how do you make sure that people are constantly on the same page? Probably means another meeting, which I hate. But I don't have to worry about it right now, obviously. But as I go into faith-based productivity and I want to see that thing grow, I would love to hire a bunch of people who are helping me grow that thing at some point. Like, that's kind of in the back of my mind, is as this grows, potentially, how do I scale it up? And I know that there's a lot of resources for doing just that. One of them that we used at Agent Efficiency was scaling up. It's the Rockefeller Habits 2.0 by Vern Harnish. And it's like 400 pages or something. I haven't gone through the whole thing. There was like one section of it where we would get into like the 1-page strategic plan and all that. So again, this is probably me worrying about something I don't need to be worrying about, but like, how do you make sure everybody's pulling in the same direction? Because a big part of this is that people are bought in and they have a sense of purpose behind what they do. And I think the more segmented, or the more teams you have, the easier it is for that team over there to get disconnected from the why and the big thing that's driving the work that you're doing. So
yeah,
I don't know, maybe I'm making a bigger deal of it than it needs to be, but that's just in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I don't think that, I'm not there. And we've got a ways to go before we get to that point. If we needed to, when I talk about splitting off into 2 different teams, for us, it would probably be fairly simple to segment like our client work versus our internal work, and put 2 different teams working in 2 different directions in that way.
Sure.
And one team's focus is delivering quality code to our clients. The other is building our internal services and building out our strategic services in the long run, which are like subscription style services that we're starting to get into. So I could easily see splitting those 2 teams apart, whereas right now we operate as one team that operates on both of those, which some people may think it's kind of messy. It actually works out really well. So I think if we needed to get to the point where we say had 8 or 9 people on it, I think that would be too big for what we're doing. So I would need to segment those off, but we're a ways away from that. So I haven't spent hardly any time thinking about it.
Sure. Yep. No worries. That actually leads into the next chapter on time. So I'll just jump in here with the daily stand-up. This is the short daily meeting. And one of the key points under the daily stand-up, and really tied to what we were just talking about, is that the greater the communication saturation, the faster the team. Well, the more people that you have, and ultimately the more teams that you have under the umbrella of the company, I would argue the harder it is to get that communication saturation. But the daily stand-up meeting, this was something that they started implementing, and they saw a 400% improvement in the first week, which is crazy. But I totally get it. I think that there's a lot of value in this, and if you've not done a daily stand-up in any of the organizations that you've worked with, you probably hear that statistic and you're like, yeah, right, there is absolutely no way that's going to happen. But it does.
Yeah, it does.
And this is where the Scrum Master really provides a lot of value, because in the daily stand-up, there's 3 questions that they ask. What did you do yesterday to help the team finish the sprint? What will you do today to help the team finish the sprint? And what obstacles are getting in the team's way? So again, the Scrum Master's job is basically to help the team overcome those obstacles and those impediments that are getting in the way. And I like the fact that there's 2 different questions here. So this is a little bit different than how we implemented things at Agent Efficiency. We would plan our work and we would mention what we were going to be getting done that day. But I think there is a difference between what you say you're going to do today to help the team finish the sprint and at the time of the daily stand-up tomorrow, did you actually do the things that you said you were going to do?
Right.
Especially if there are obstacles or impediments that are in the team's way, because a lot of times people will jump in to help somebody overcome an obstacle or remove one of those impediments. And when you do that, it means that, especially if you're a remote team, you have less time to work on the things that you had planned to do. So I think that asking both of those questions is valuable, because if you see a pattern of the things that I'm planning to do, and then I only get 50% of them done every day, and maybe you even have justifiable excuses for why you're not getting those things done. If you are encountering obstacles and impediments every single day, something is wrong systemically. At that point, you need to not just solve the thing, you need to ask the question, why does this thing keep happening? And if you're able to remove those things, then that's when things can really start clicking. Now, on the other end of that, I've been there where nobody has any obstacles or roadblocks ever. And at that point, you're like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
You're not telling me the whole story. In fact, one of the things that would happen with some of the people on the Agent Efficiency team is that they would lose internet or whatever, and they'd put no roadblocks, but my internet isn't working. I'm like, that's a roadblock.
That's your roadblock.
Yeah, and that's just an example. I mean, everybody's got those things where you think like, oh, it's no big deal. I don't need to bother other people with this thing. I don't need to tell that person to stop what they're doing and help me out. But Scrum is really based on helping the team, especially the Scrum Master. So that's the other thing I like about this application of this is it's not me telling the team, hey, can somebody stop what they're doing and help me out? Like, you're telling the Scrum Master, and their job is to help you remove this thing. So maybe they can't do it. Maybe they have to get Joe in accounting to to give you the account passwords or whatever that you need. But let them do that. Don't try to solve these things on your own.
Right. Yeah, and I will also say, like, at Procourse, when we do our daily stand-ups, we don't do it on a call because it's, we're a distributed team. And there are folks that are overseas as a part of that team. So it's kind of a mess to try to get it nailed down every single day when we're going to connect. So we do it asynchronously, and we just do it in text form, which frankly is kind of nice, because then when you're filling it out, you're looking at yesterday's, and it's like, okay, did I actually do what I said I was going to do? And you're sitting here looking at it like, okay.
The one thing I would say about that is, the greater the communication saturation, the faster the team.
Correct.
A lot can be assumed via text regarding communication. And so if you can, I would say it would be better to use a tool like Zoom where you have a video call and you're looking at people's faces every day and you're talking face to face, whether you are in the same room or not. I think a whole lot more gets communicated that way.
Agreed.
But yeah, if the MVP of the daily stand-up would be, this is what I'm going to work on today, no roadblocks, and put that in a Slack message or whatever thing you use. I know you don't use Slack.
No.
Well, you do use Slack, but there was a different tool you mentioned. Was it Rocket Chat or something?
Rocket Chat is what we use. It's an open source version of that. So, and I know, I get what you're saying. I do. I just don't think, like, right now we're a small enough team, because with 2 team members, 3, if you count me as part of that, it's still small enough that we can do a ton that way.
Yep.
And then if something does come up, we do connect by phone or video throughout the week as needed. So that does happen. But part of the thing that's super helpful is, like, in one particular case, I've got a team member that he's filling that out, and by the time I get up in the morning, he's already filled it out and he's working on things.
Yep.
So one of the first things I can do when I get up is look at the impediments that are in his way, knock those out first. That way he's still running at full speed, and then I can get into some of my pieces. But that's my job. Like, that's what my goal is. So it's kind of nice from that stance. Would it be better by video? Yes. I don't think we're big enough for that quite yet. I think if we added maybe 2 more team members and doubled the amount of work that we have coming in, Yeah, I could see doing that pretty easily and would probably make that move immediately. So I just don't see us there quite yet. We just haven't grown to that point, in my opinion.
The problem with that approach, and not saying it's the wrong approach, but just the thing that will happen that way is that you hire the 2 new people because you got some bigger contracts and you're trying to get the work done. At that point, it's hard to say, okay, let's stop working and add another daily meeting.
Correct.
Correct. Especially the first couple times you do it and people are having tech issues and Zoom's got an update and you're like, oh, this is just ridiculous. Let's go back to doing things the way we used to. So I do think that there is some value in saying, like, this is going to be the thing we're going to do as we get bigger. So let's implement it now and build around it. But I think it's fine to work the way that you're working too. Also, the people that you are working with are really important. And if they are bought in and they're making this work, actually, ultimately, they're going to be the ones that make this work or not work.
Right.
And so how much communication do you need before you have saturated your team with the communication of the vision? I think it was Sean McCabe who said that you really haven't communicated your vision until people can communicate it back to you. And maybe you can do that via text and never having a video call. My experience, though, video is much more effective when it comes to that sort of stuff. And that's just my own personal experience. It's not saying that you have to do it that way, but it's something that I think not just you, but the listener, if you're looking to implement Scrum, it's something that you should think about. Because when it comes to your vision, you really can't over-communicate the vision. You can under-communicate it, and then after a while, there's going to be big problems that you can go back and you can fix, but that's going to cost you more than the daily stand-up and figuring out a way to consistently make sure that everybody is on the same page and pulling in the same direction. So I'm trying to say it nicely, where I'm not saying like, you have to do this, Joe, because I don't think you do have to do it. But I think the general rule, like there's always going to be exceptions and you can modify Scrum however you want. This is one of the things I think you can definitely modify to fit the way that your team works. But I would encourage people to err on the side of caution when it comes to communicating with your team.
Correct. Yeah. Quick note there. In our case, the team, we're doing it the other way around. Like the team is bought in. They tend to iterate to me what we're trying to accomplish as a company. So that's, I think you just referred to that. But yeah, they tend to refer the vision to me on a number of cases. So things like a text-based stand-up are pretty easy because they know the long-term goal. Like they know the intent of these products and services and what it is that we're doing. Like they know that. And they're pretty excited about them. So that's a thing that I'm not, like, I don't have to worry about that piece right now. We do spend some time on video once a week for our sprint calls, which hopefully we'll get to here soon. We got a lot on this list yet, Mike. But, this is a thing that I feel like we have a pretty good handle on, which is why I think we get away with it. So there's a lot of nuance and subtlety with it. It's kind of hard to get some of that across in the macro side of this. But
yep.
I feel like for us, the text version does do a pretty good job, but it's because I feel like we're all bought in.
Sure. Yep. Makes sense. One other thing in this chapter before we move on, so this isn't a 3-hour episode, is the cool concept of sprints, which we've referred to in this episode. But basically the way Scrum works is you have a sprint, which you can define for yourself. I think typically they're in week intervals. So 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even 4 weeks.
I think the standard is 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah. I think 2 weeks is probably the place to start, depending on the size of the team and the size of your projects. Maybe you want to make it shorter, maybe you want to make it longer, but 2 weeks is definitely where I would begin with implementing this, because you don't want problems to exist for more than 2 weeks, and there will be problems at the beginning of implementing Scrum. So you do need to check in every 2 weeks, go through that retrospective process and figure out what are the things that are keeping the team from increasing their velocity or how fast they can work.
Yeah, quick side note though, we do 1 week sprints, but we work in software, so things move fast. At one point I even debated doing 3-day sprints, but that seemed like a bit like overkill. So
sure,
we stick with 1 week.
Yeah, I think 1 week is probably ideal for a lot of teams. I think the more often you check in, the better off you're going to be, especially if you're a remote team.
Right. Right. I think that's also what gets us away, like what helps us do text-based stand-ups. So there you go.
Sure.
Waste is a crime, chapter 5.
Okay. So this section we can move through quickly, but this is also where my one action item comes from.
So not quickly.
Well, in the previous chapter, he mentions on page 81 that wasting time is a slow form of suicide, which is a little bit strong, but makes the point. In chapter 5, he talks about how 85% of effort is wasted. He breaks it down into 3 different types of waste, and I'm going to mess up how to pronounce these words. Muri, which is waste through unreasonableness, and that's where planning comes in. Mura, which is waste through inconsistency, that's where doing the work comes in. And muda, which is waste through outcomes, and this is where you need to be reviewing and checking things. All right, and then there are a couple things that cause people to work harder and longer than necessary. He also adds one to this section. He says there's 3 things and then gives 4. So the first one is absurdity. The second one is unreasonable expectations. The third one is overburden. And then the fourth one is emotional waste. Okay, so this stuff really resonated with me. Like, I think I tend to overuse that word too. So I'm going to try to remove resonate from my vocabulary. But these are things that really made me think. These are things that I had an emotional response to when I read this. There's also a story in here, Scott Maxwell. This is a guy who started working at a company, and it was expected that everybody worked every day. So he started working 7 days, then he went to 6 days, then he went to 5 days. Okay, and he mentions in here that he always wanted to try 4 days or even 3 days, but he wasn't sure the company would let him. And we've probably all seen those graphs of how much you get done and how many hours you put in. And I think a lot of them say the peak is at like 39 hours per week. That's like maximum productivity. And after that point, it just goes way down. I kind of think that there's a 80-20 to this. And 80-20 isn't the right term because that kind of implies that you're going to get 80% of your work done, but you're only going to work 1 day a week. And that's not what I'm saying. But as you're ascending that curve, there is a point where this is the absolute best point in terms of I can still get a lot of stuff done, and I am maximizing my effort because I'm not working harder or longer than necessary based on absurdity, unreasonable expectations, overburden, or emotional waste. Okay, in my action item, and there's no way I'm going to be implementing this right now.
Why not?
So maybe we don't even follow up on this next time. Maybe we check in 3 months, whatever. No, I'm not committing to this right now. But this challenged me, this whole idea of working 4 days a week. And when I mentioned this to my wife as I was reading this section, she got really excited. So I know I'm going to have some support in trying this out, but I don't feel like I need to establish a new normal first. Once I do that, then I can figure out what's the most efficient and effective way to get the work that I need to get done. But right now, everything is kind of in flux, and I don't even know what that looks like. So this is definitely not the time to say I'm only going to work 4 days a week. But this is on my radar, and I think that this is a really cool idea. Not just because I have an extra day to do nothing, which is where a lot of people would think, how a lot of people would think about this. I don't view that day as doing nothing. I view that day as being, maybe that's my thinking day, where that's when I'm going to do nothing but backlog grooming. If we're going to do something as a family, that would be the day that we do that. So I'm still quote unquote working, but I'm checking different boxes, different areas of the wheel of life, and having that built into a regular cadence where this is the day for all of these different things to happen. That's really appealing to me. And based on Scott Maxwell's story, I want to give this a shot.
Yeah, I want to report on this one because I think this would be exciting to see. I don't think I could do it. I have too many ideas that I want to act on. Even like if I took a day off, I'd just be trying to go play on a computer to play with different ideas that I had.
Yep.
So I don't think that would work out for me, but I think it would be kind of a cool thing, and I think you could probably pull that off. I'm definitely curious to see how this works for you.
Yeah, well, just as another anecdote to this, I read as a Gap book not too long ago, It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work by the Basecamp guys. They, in the summer, because they're in Chicago, I believe, and summer is the only time of the year that it's nice in the Midwest.
Yeah.
They work 4-day weeks during the summer. And when I read that I think they do 10-hour days, but I don't, from what I gathered, it really wasn't, the emphasis wasn't on the 40 hours per week. And that's kind of the point he's making in this chapter, is that you measure the output, not the time spent. Okay, so if I'm measuring the output, and maybe I am working longer on those 4 days a week, maybe I am still getting to 39 hours or wherever that tipping point is as the most productive point for how I could spend my time in a week. But having a whole day set aside for other things that are important, that is traditionally assigned to doing more work, I think there's a lot of value in that approach. And so the fact that the Basecamp guys can do it, at least in the summer, that raises the question, well, why can't you do that all year round? So I don't know. Maybe you can. Let's see.
I think if I was, because I'm planning to join a company at some point here in the near future, and I think if I were to stay out on my own, I would maybe consider that. If I got like the client side of it offloaded 100%, I could definitely see experimenting with that. It's just not reasonable right now. Like, it's not a thing I could try to do, but I definitely have an interest in it. So I'm not taking it as an action item by any means, but I will definitely hold you to yours.
Yeah, just give me some time. Check back. What is this? Episode 58? Maybe by 65. We can.
Nah, we're gonna look at 60.
All right, go for it. But it's not gonna be implemented by 60. I can tell you that.
Fun times. All right, let's keep going. Chapter 6: Plan reality, not fantasy.
Yeah. So this is where a lot of Scrum, key Scrum elements come in, and I put a whole bunch of stuff in here. We don't have to go deep on a lot of this stuff. I do want to touch on this Fibonacci sequence. This is the series of numbers that they use when estimating story points. And I guess we didn't really talk about stories. Well, I guess that's in this chapter too.
Yeah.
So an essential piece of Scrum is that for every task that you create, you write a story. And the story has to be in a particular format. There's 3 parts: who, what, and why. So as the business, we want to do X so that we achieve Y. And when you write it that way, that means that whoever's picking up that task can clearly understand what they're supposed to do and why they're doing it. And that's a big part of getting people to have purpose behind what they're doing, which is a key piece to increasing the velocity or how much work people can get done. All right, so that's cool. And in Jira, you've got space for not only that, but also the story points, which is kind of the estimate on how much effort something is going to be. So something that's really simple might be 1 story point, and something that's really complicated, the 1 story point issue maybe takes you an hour. 8 story points, maybe that's something that if that's the only thing you worked on, that would take an entire day. And the story points that get assigned are not arbitrary. They're not just an estimate of how long you think this is going to take. They follow a specific sequence. So the sequence goes 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, and you could probably just keep going. But each number in the sequence is the sum of the 2 previous numbers. So 3 story points, 1 plus 2, 5 story points, 2 plus 3, 8 story points, 5 plus 3. Okay, you get the idea here. And what this does is it makes it easier to estimate because you can choose which one something is closer to. So we're terrible at picking out a number out of the hat for how much effort something is going to be, but we are pretty good at estimating this thing is closer to this than that. So he uses an example of the story points representing different sized dogs. And he's like, is this a Chihuahua or is this a Golden Retriever? And viewing it that way, it's a lot easier to get accurate estimates for things. So his Fibonacci sequence this is something that you sent me your screenshot because we were both playing around with implementing this in OmniFocus. So you follow Fibonacci sequences here for a little while, but then you kind of get off at 20. I was curious why you did that.
Yeah, it's a pretty common thing. Like that's not a thing that I made up. That's a pretty common deal. I forget there's different ways that you can pick the numbers for this. Fibonacci is a common one, but this is like a runoff of that.
Okay.
And it starts at 0.5, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, but then it deviates from the Fibonacci, and instead of 21, it goes to 20. So 8, 13, 20, 40, 100, and then it quits. Like that's a pretty common Scrum methodology for story points. It's what we use at ProCourse.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to remember why we decided. I think it had to do with it was easier to remember because it's 20, 40, 100 is easier to remember than the 21. What is it? 53. Like I don't know what those numbers
21,
are.
34, 55. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier to remember 20, 40, 100 than it is to remember those. And it has to do with how easy is it to memorize sequences of numbers and what your brain can handle versus the general public being able to memorize things. That's where that tends to come from, I think.
Gotcha.
I'm not 100% on that, but that's where those numbers come from. And again, it's what we use at ProCourse because when we write our stories, typically it's me or our development manager who are writing those. But then there's also, and I guess I'll go on to the next piece here for this planning poker.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys use this.
We haven't, but we're going to in just a few days.
Yes.
We're going to do our first poker session.
Are you buying everybody the cards?
No, Jira has a thing that you can build into it, and it's all digital. So,
oh, nice.
Like that's what we'll end up using. But we write the stories of what needs to go in there, and then we use the story points through the Fibonacci runoff. But then the other thing and he talks about this in the book, is we're really bad at, to your point, Mike, we're bad at coming up with a number. We're good at relative. Is this an 8 or a 13? Like that's a lot easier than is this an 8 or a 9? That's why you use those Fibonacci pieces. But the other thing that you want to do long term, so that you can do some of the reporting and get better at judging how much you can do, you want your story points to be accurate relative to each other.
Yes.
And although I could just go assign story points, what I think is a 13, someone else on the team might think is a 3, and someone else may think it's a 40. And if that's the case, then we need to have a discussion about what does this involve and what's the right method to do this thing, and how complex is it. So, and we also need to compare it to what are some of the other stories we've done in the past that are 13s, or the others that we've done that are 40s, and does this play into those? So it helps you stay accurate as compared to yourself. The planning poker method, and what you're referring to with the cards is you can get these cards that have your numbers on them, and everybody, you put the story up that you're trying to estimate. How many story points is this story? You put that up on the screen or mention it, and then everybody lays down the number that they would like to estimate it at face down. When everybody's played their card, you show the number, and if they're all the same, great, that's your estimate. If they're different, you take the average of those. If they're all within one step of each other, you take the average of them, and then that becomes your estimate. But if someone is 2 steps removed, like say I play a 13 and Mike plays a 2, we're more than 2 steps apart. And then that means you have to have a conversation about it.
Yep.
And then you pull all your cards in, and then you do it again. And you have that whole estimation process a second time and you keep doing that until you get within 1 step, average it, and you're good to go. So we have not done this at ProCourse, but we're planning to, and I'll have to report next time like how that goes. But it's kind of it'll be kind of different because we'll have to do it asynchronously. We won't be able to do it all in one shot or all together. We don't have the time to do it in our weekly calls because Joe doesn't like meetings. And Scrum, per the book, has a lot of meetings in it, and I don't like that. So
yes, it does.
I deviate from that piece quite a bit. So I try to build in some of the async pieces to help with that. But the other side of this story point estimation piece that you get is you'll hear people talk about a burn down chart for a sprint, and what that means is you have the number. Say it's 100 points that you're going to do across the team in 1 week. across the week, you can see the chart go from number of points is up the y-axis, and the days go across the x-axis. And you should see that at 100 at the very top, and as you go across the time, it goes down towards 0. That's ideal. That's how you can see your burn down across that. That also helps you determine what the velocity of the team is, and it helps you figure out how many story points you can do in a week, which is also helpful, especially if you run a business like what we do. It means that I can estimate along with the team how many story points a client project is going to take, which means that I then have a pretty good feel for how long, like what kind of time estimates do I need to give the client on the other side of things as to how long it's going to take before we release it. So it's pretty helpful in that sense. So I'm a pretty big fan of the whole velocity piece. So, it's a thing that I can appreciate. But that's also me as the owner and the person who's the product owner here in some regards talking to clients. It's super helpful in that sense. As a team member, I tend to get a little nervous with it because I always wonder, like, the people who are looking at this, am I doing enough? Are they wanting me to do more? Like, I get a little nervous from that stance. So, you have to kind of ease your team members' mindset and show them how it helps them. And it's not a thing you're going to use against them, because you will not use it against them. Please don't use it against them. Yep. So that is not what you need it for anything.
Right. I want to go back to the planning poker thing real quickly, and then I've got a little rant on the velocity piece.
All right.
So the planning poker, you mentioned, like, if the numbers are more than 3 cards apart, the high and the low numbers talk about why they think the number that they picked is the right number. And then, as you mentioned, you do another round of planning poker. This is the thing that makes me nervous about the planning poker stuff. And this kind of ties into the next chapter. There's a concept of what he calls the wise fool. And I'll just mention this real quickly because it applies to this thing here as well. The wise fool is somebody who asks the uncomfortable questions or raises the uncomfortable truths. And this was me at Asian Efficiency. I was always the person saying, this is way more work than than you guys are thinking.
Sure.
I can also say that after a while, it is hard to embrace that role as the wise fool. And the point that he makes in the next chapter is, if you've got wise fools, then you need to make sure that they feel safe and they're not holding things back. But one of the things that caused some friction, I guess, was the fact that I was always the wise fool, because right or wrong, and I don't think the team did anything to facilitate this thought process, but it was still there. As the person who was always saying, this is going to be more effort, we have to cut back the things that we're going to do, which is very anti-Scrum and anti-velocity, as a person who's always pushing back on things, the tendency is to say, well, maybe you're right. Maybe it's less. Pretty much every time I did that, though, I regretted it. So in this planning poker, we didn't implement planning poker to the letter of the law like they did here. We just would groom the backlog. And then as we were doing the backlog grooming call, before we did our sprint call, we would talk about why we think that certain tasks are a certain amount of story points. And as long as you have people on the team who are understanding of the point of view that you have, then you can absolutely implement planning poker and there will be no issues. And I'm not saying that this happened at Asian Efficiency, but I can totally see a scenario where this would happen, where people are just like, nah, that's easy. And they're not involved with it because they don't understand. That's not their domain of expertise. And so they say, no, that's 3. And you're like, no, this is 21. Like, as the person who is saying, because at that point when you're saying this is 21 story points, you are the impediment. You are the thing that is keeping the team from achieving their goal. So the pressure is on you to acquiesce to the lower numbers. And so as you start implementing this, make sure that people don't feel that way.
Yeah, I know that the benefit that we have is we're talking about software. We're not talking about, how many videos and how much time is this video going to take to produce, you don't get what I'm saying, like a video course versus adding buttons to a website. For us, if someone has a discrepancy with the number of points, I can easily see that this is actually a really good teaching tool.
Yep.
Or a good learning process, because if someone thinks it's a 3 and someone else thinks it's a 13, there's a pretty good chance that the person who sees it a 3 knows a way to do it that's very simple.
Or they don't understand the complexity of the task because the story isn't written well enough.
Yeah, like there's a discrepancy, which means I need to do a better job as, the person writing those stories. But that's, to me, I can see it as a pretty good learning process there. But I think you're right. If someone's saying, no, it's more complicated than that, I think that's up to the Scrum Master to make sure that voice is heard.
Yes.
And remains heard. I think that's where that comes in. And if that person is not listened to, you're going to defeat them and they're going to be upset in the long run.
Yeah, this ties into velocity then, because you want to figure out how fast your team can go, and then you want to remove the impediments so they can go even faster. All right, couple of issues with this though. If you're constantly asking the question that he tells you to ask in this chapter, how can we go even faster? As someone who was typically the roadblock, like I said, or the wise fool, always pushing back on things and saying that they're going to take longer, one way for the team to go faster would be to get rid of you, or at least not invite you to the meetings, And I don't think that's a great approach, and I'm definitely not projecting that that's what happened with agent efficiency, by the way. I loved our meetings, and people told me all the time that they appreciated the feedback that I gave, because I do tend to overthink things, overanalyze things. And there were times when I thought things might be a little bit harder than they were going to be. And at some point, you have to disagree but commit, the Jeff Bezos thing. And that's fine. I'm happy to do that. And then we'll just learn from it. If I was right, then we'll adjust it for next time. If I was wrong, great. We can move a little bit faster. So I definitely don't think there was any animosity there. But if the question that you're constantly asking is how can we go even faster, the cheater quick way to do that is to estimate things as less effort. But when you do that, you're going to diminish the quality of the thing that you are producing. That is not in alignment with true Scrum, I would argue.
Right.
Also, if you're constantly asking this question, especially as you're beginning to implement Scrum, you're removing impediments, you're accelerating your velocity, that's great. There's got to be a point, though, where you've hit diminishing returns. And I am uncomfortable with the idea of every single sprint, if we're not increasing our velocity, then we have failed, which is kind of the not explicitly stated, but communicated message in this book, is that you should constantly be improving your velocity. Okay. In order to do that though, you need to take into account everything that you are going to be doing. So we got that question at Agent Efficiency, is how can we increase our velocity? And the problem was that there were a whole bunch of things that were quote unquote keeping the lights on, creating podcast episodes, writing blog posts, like the regular content schedule. That's part of the normal amount of things that need to be done. And then you've got obviously the additional stuff that you want to do, creating new products, doing launches, things like that. So you've got to balance those two things. And then you get to the point where, like, if you have things that aren't being tracked on that board, going back to your email as an example, at some point you are making the decision, this is the most important thing that I can be doing right now, but every minute that you're spending in your email, you're not contributing to improving the velocity. So if you're really asking this question all the time, you're going to feel guilty every time you go into your email. You get what I'm saying? And it doesn't have to be email. It could be something else that maybe is keeping the lights on, maybe is bringing value to the organization. But if it is not being tracked on the sprint board and it is not contributing to the velocity, the natural argument is going to be that you should not be doing that thing. And I think that is a gross generalization that is very often wrong. And I also think that at some point you can achieve a certain velocity. You can be doing things really, really well. Things are humming. At that point, just be happy with the way things are. Yes, look for ways that you can improve things. Yes, ask the same questions, but don't feel like you've got to squeeze out every drop of efficiency from this thing. I think like if you have this question being asked, the other way that you can quickly increase the velocity is everybody could work a little bit more. And then the next sprint, you work a little bit more. And the next sprint, you work a little bit more and a little bit more. And pretty soon you're working 80-hour weeks because you got to keep boosting your velocity, and then at that point, things crash, go over the cliff, and you got to hit the reset button. Okay, where do we go wrong? And it's all these little things, but I totally see this question, how can we go even faster, as the thing that could get you to that place.
I don't ask this question.
Yeah, I don't like it. I think that it's fair for the Scrum Master to go through the retrospective and think, how can we improve things? But how can we go faster? That just implies like, okay, you did a great job last sprint. Now do more.
Yeah.
And do more. And do more. Keep putting more weight on the bar. At some point, I'm not an Olympic weightlifter. I'm not going to be able to do anymore.
Yeah, I don't ask if what would help us go faster. I do ask if that was the right number of story points.
Yep.
And it's a very distinct difference because I'm trying to figure out if they are comfortable at that number. I'm also asking not how do we go faster, but do we have systems that are slowing you down? Like, what is a thing that is getting in our way that we spend a lot of time on every week? Things like spinning up demo servers. I've talked about that before, where we have to put a stage system in place so that we can test the system and get it out the door. Like that's a thing that we have to do. Well, how do I cut the time back on that so that I can get a demo server quicker? Like that would be an important thing, and maybe it's worth us putting a few story points to streamlining that.
Yep.
Like that we will do, but how do I increase how do we move faster? That to me, asking that question is disheartening.
Yep.
So I have a hard time with that. I'm more of one who wants to ask the questions around that help them figure out how to help themselves.
Exactly.
That's more of what I'm trying to do, because I don't want us to get to a point where it's all about the number of points we can crank through. Like that's not the point here. No pun intended. Like that's the that could be our goal, but our real goal is are we writing the correct stories to begin with?
Yep.
Are we focusing in the right areas? Or are we making the right strategic decisions and then focusing our points towards those? That's my intent there. As Scrum Master of that team, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yep. I think that the description of Scrum in this book assumes that everybody on the team has made work their sole reason for living. And they are constantly going to be looking for ways to get just a little bit more velocity.
Right.
Which is fine. Like you can really believe in the work that you're doing. You can have a purpose behind what you're doing. That makes total sense. But if you were to embrace this for Procourse, at least the way that I read it, and I don't think this is explicitly what he's saying, but this is the message that got communicated to me, was let's say you really want to grow Procourse and you're all in with Scrum and you're going to ask this question, which I know you're not going to because you just said so, but if you're going to ask every sprint, how can we go even faster? At some point, you're going to, because we're recording this in the middle of the day on a Wednesday, you're going to say, those 2 hours devoted to Bookworm, I should be quote unquote working with those hours. I should be devoting those to Procourse. And I don't think that's a healthy attitude. And I think that is just an inevitable point that people are going to get to if you ask this question. You're going to force them to make those compromises between work and life. And I don't like that term work-life balance, but at some point you have to accept, whether you are the CEO, the Scrum Master, the product owner, whatever, that this is the point where we can, like this amount of hours, basically. This is the maximum thing we can ask of people without decreasing their happiness, which is the next chapter. And you're not going to go past that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I can see how, there's a lot of this, especially with the velocity side of things, where things can get out of hand. Like you can really get focused on the wrong thing, for sure. Especially with, let's just go ahead and jump in here. So chapter 7, happiness. One of the key things, because we talked about the wise fool already, but another key aspect of this is the happiness metric. And he mentions how during his Scrum meetings, he would ask the question, when you're asking the what should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we continue doing? A follow-up to that during those meetings would be, how happy are you, like on a scale of 1 to 5, how happy are you with your role in this company? And also on the same scale, how happy are you with the direction of the company? And he refers to those as the happiness metric. And then he actually takes those numbers and plots them on graphs and then compares them to his velocity charts in order to determine, at what velocity can you operate at and still keep people happy, which kind of bugged me to some degree. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, so you are playing games with how hard to push people and still keep them happy.
And this assumes that people are going to feel comfortable sharing if they are unhappy.
Correct.
Which I would argue that people are not going to feel that way. I never had qualms voicing my displeasure when we were asked to do things that were, that I considered crossed the line, and it didn't happen hardly at all. And if it happened for a season, that was a choice I had to make. But eventually, disagree but commit. I would go in with it and whatever. I recognize this is a temporary thing.
Right. But
I would argue there's a ton of people who would say the way we're working isn't working for me, but I'm not going to say anything because I'm afraid of losing my job.
Yeah. So I don't think, this is not a thing we do at ProCourse. I don't ask this question, at least not in those meetings. I have some follow-ups with each individual person outside of that team meeting, and I try to make sure that those one-on-ones are open to where I can learn that type of thing and continue to keep everybody moving in a way that's healthy for them. That's what I try to do. I don't know if that's the right way to do it or not, but trying to quantify it and then plot it against how many story points can I get out of this person, it feels scummy to me.
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, there's two sides to this, though, because he also mentions in this chapter the happy bubbles. And this is where people start to think, we don't need to improve anymore. We've earned a break, stuff like that. I get that. I understand why that can be dangerous. So you do want to constantly be looking for the low-hanging fruit and ways that you can improve. But also, I would argue that if you've just created an awesome place to work, where he says on page 159, I want people to love coming to work. Okay, so if you succeeded doing that, then don't necessarily push them because that's going to have an adverse relationship with the happiness, like you mentioned. It's not a question of if it will have an impact. It's just a question of how much it's going to have an impact. And this is kind of tied to the Scrum board, the different sections, which we should probably go over. So if you are happy and you're asking these questions with the happiness metric, and you are happy doing the work, then basically he says, this is the natural progression that things are going to go through. You've got the backlog. These are all things that you could be doing. Then you've got the things that are selected for development or things that are to do. And from there, you take things, you work on them. They're in progress. Once they are ready to be reviewed, they go into a review section. And then when they're completed, they go to done. And this is my interpretation of reading this section, which I thought initially it was kind of weird that he talks about the Scrum board in this section. But basically what he's saying is that when people are happy, things will be moving from one column to the next on a regular schedule. You're not going to have a whole bunch of things sitting in to be reviewed for several days at a time, because if everybody's happy and everybody's connected with the vision behind the project that they're working on, they're going to ship the thing. They're going to get it to done. They're going to see that thing in review. They're going to jump in and review it so that they can mark it off, because one of the key tenets of Scrum is that half done equals not done. So you don't get half credit if you did 8 story points worth of work on a 13 story point issue. You get 0 story points credit for that in the burn down chart unless you ship that 13 story point issue.
Yes. Now, I kind of want to move on here to this last section, because I feel like and I want to frame these two pieces here a little bit, because I feel like it'll tie together a lot of what we've been talking about, all these different aspects of Scrum. And you mentioned the Scrum board here briefly, but the last chapter here, it's chapter 8, priorities, and he talks about two different things with, one is the product owner, the other is backlog grooming. And I'll let you kind of go through the backlog grooming thing here in a little bit, but the product owner is somebody who they're not the one doing the stories on the board. They're the ones who are helping to nail down which of the stories are more important than the other that need to be done first. They're the ones that help basically reorder the stories that you have in your backlog and get those in place. And then they're also taking the results of your team's sprint, reviewing them, and a lot of times they're the ones that are doing the actual demo with the client or with whoever your stakeholders are. They are the ones that are helping set some of the broader direction of the particular product itself, thus product owner. Now, where this all kind of comes together is, we've talked about stories. You've got the story points assigned to those. You have a backlog, which is the full list of all of those stories. And when you put together your sprint, you're essentially saying, how many story points across this backlog can I handle during this sprint? So in our case, say it's 100 points. We would select 100 points worth of backlog stories, put it onto our active sprint, and then that is what we kick off and work on throughout that next week. And as we start working on one of those stories, you move it to the center column. It goes from to do to doing. It's sitting in the in progress column. And when we get it done, we move it to the done column. And in our case, when it hits the done column, that's a trigger to the product owner. In some cases, it's me, and sometimes it's our development manager. When it hits that done column, that's a trigger to go contact the client and say, hey, we got this thing done. Can you go take a look at it? And then we get the feedback, and then it goes back into our backlog, and it goes right back into the system. So, that's how we do things, and it seems to work really well. It's kind of the classic way of using Scrum, but a lot of it's dependent on the backlog being correct, Mike. I'll quit talking now.
Right. No, I like that. I like that implementation. The backlog grooming piece here, this is something that we probably could spend a whole lot of time on, but we won't. I will just say that this is really, really important. As someone who had done the backlog grooming for the podcast and for the blog at Asian Efficiency, there is a disproportionate amount of time that is saved by spending time up front grooming the backlog and making sure that the descriptions are as accurate as they can be, and really identifying that these are the things that we need to be working on. This is where he talks about the 80-20 and the minimum viable product, where you just want to get something out there and start getting some feedback on it. But picking the right things to work on is a very important job, and you can't spend too much time going through that, I would argue. Now, obviously, you can. There is a point of diminishing returns, but even someone who is a high planner like me, the tendency is to be like, well, I know what I need to work on. I'll just sit down to work. No. Groom the backlog. Select the things before the sprint meeting, and then as a team, you can decide what are the things that you are actually going to be working on. This is going to provide a disproportionate amount of value, and it's one of the things that you can easily undervalue it, especially if you've got a bunch of stuff that you need to get done and you're putting an emphasis on cranking up the velocity. This is another thing that could suffer from that, which is probably why I think he recommends that you have somebody who's a product owner who's not part of the team.
Correct. Yeah.
We didn't have the luxury of doing that. So maybe that solves a lot of those issues, but I think for smaller teams, you're never going to have somebody who's just a product owner. You are going to be working in the sprint as well as on the sprint.
Yeah, which is hard because I fit that. Like I sit in that role.
Yeah,
and I float between those. So yes, I can say that is hard. But at the same time, what I found was like I had to do a lot of the product owner roles I need to do outside of our sprint calls.
Yep, exactly.
So I do a lot of let me take a minute and reflect on what the strategy of the business is and what our priorities are. I have to think about that outside the call and then do all my work there and then join the call and just operate under the two hats of Scrum Master and team member, because I can't, it's too hard, it's too many hats to juggle on one scenario. Is trying to fit all three of those in there. So don't do that.
Yep. Yeah. I think this, actually looking back at my notes, he mentions that the product owner should ideally spend half their time working with the customers and half the time working with the team. So they're not spending any time working on the sprint.
Sure.
But they are responsible for what's on the backlog and what order it's in. This is where he talks about how you can't prioritize everything. Page 189, he has a quote from Frederick II of Prussia, which I'd not heard before, but I loved. He says, "He who will defend everything defends nothing." So that was pretty cool. And the this is also where the best advice for getting rolling with Scrum comes in. He said, if you want to start implementing Scrum, the first thing you have to do is create a backlog and then get a team. So that would be probably the place to end this. Like if you were going to take everything we've talked about today and just get rolling with this, create a backlog and a team. One other thing I do want to mention, because we've talked about it, but not really addressed it specifically, is the whole retrospective. That kind of ties into the previous chapter on happiness, but really that retrospective, that's the other piece I would add to the advice. Create a backlog, create a team, and then have a retrospective so you can get feedback from the team. Figure out what are the things that you should start doing, stop doing, keep doing. What are the things that are going well? What are the things that can improve? And simply by asking those questions, you'll be able to remove a lot of the impediments as you start to implement this.
Yes, that's a good one. I like that spot. Action items?
Sure. So actually, I guess I wrote down 2, but one of them is done already, and that is to dabble with Scrum and OmniFocus. So we were sharing screenshots back and forth about the ways that we've implemented this. I haven't found a way that I really like yet. I'll just talk about what I've done so far, and if people have better ideas, absolutely send them via the Bookworm Club. But I created tags, and I made a master tag of Scrum, and then I put backlog, to do, in progress, review, and done as sub tags underneath that. So then I created a custom perspective, which is going to group individual actions by tag, and it's going to only show things that have one of the last 4 of those. So it's not going to show things that are in the backlog. That tag is actually on hold. So those are things that I'm not able to work on yet. And then the custom perspective shows things that are broken down by those different sections. And it's also going to show all the other tags that are associated with it. You don't have the ability to focus on just the Scrum tags, but once you go to the custom perspective, you can click on Scrum and then you see just those sections, if that makes sense. And I kind of like that. The problem is that they're vertical, they're not horizontal. So things don't move from left to right, they move from top to bottom. So I'm not sure I really like that. I also created a planning perspective, which just has things that have the backlog tag. And so I can go to that perspective, look at the things in the backlog, and then select things based on the story points, which is a whole nother tag, a whole series of tags I set up, story points, to be worked on. I have no idea if this is actually going to work. I had this idea in the shower this morning as I was thinking about recording this episode. I'm like, man, I really like Scrum. I wish there was a way to implement it using OmniFocus. And I'm like, oh, tags. I bet I could rig up some custom perspectives to do this. And I'm not super happy with the way they're at right now, but we'll see if this sticks. The other action item that I mentioned earlier was, and this is a long-term one, so definitely not, I'm not promising this by episode 60.
You got 1 month.
Not happening. But work 4 days a week. Just create a regular work rhythm where Fridays are going to be set aside for thinking, family, and I don't know, whatever else. I need to put some time into figuring out what that day is going to be, because I don't just want it to be a day where I do nothing. I want it to be intentional. I just haven't figured out exactly what's going to happen there yet.
Well, I'm not going to work 4 days a week, but I will try to do Scrum via OmniFocus and do it personally. And I did some setup on mine over this past weekend. So I've actually been running this for a few days now with quite a bit of success. But what I did, as opposed to the way that you did it, is I created a tag called Sprint. And what I did on Sunday was go through all of the tasks that are remaining in my system and tagged the ones Sprint that I felt like I needed to get done this week. But I also assigned them story points, but I didn't name them like yours. It looks like your tags are called like 1 SP or 3 SP, 5 SP, and so on. I just used the number because I'm a nerd and wrote a script for it. And I can tag it with the number itself, and then I wrote a script, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this on the show, but I have a GitHub repository for the scripts that I use on a regular basis. So I'll get a link to that in the show notes, but it's OF scripts. You can search GitHub for OF scripts and get there. And I'll make sure this is loaded. The script is loaded onto that repository before this episode goes live. But all that the script does is it's, of all the tasks that you select in OmniFocus, it loops through all the tags on all of those tasks and then adds up any of them that are numbers. and tells you how many there are, like what the count is on those. So what you can do is you can tag things sprint, select the tag sprint, and give those all the number of story points you want them to have, and then select them all and run the script, and it'll tell you how many points are there. That's all it does. Super handy, but it means that if I want to set a goal for 100 story points in a week, it's easy for me to get a view of, do I have that assigned or not? Which, that's what I decided on. I was deciding I was going to do 100 points in a week. And you'll notice, Mike, the screenshot I sent you says 123.5 story points, which means that when I ran that, I realized, oh, crud. I'm not going to be able to do that this week. That's too much. So it was an immediate indicator to me that wouldn't work. But some of the structure I've got around this is that there's really 3 levels of tasks that I maintain in OmniFocus at the moment. One is the sprint level, the ones I've committed to doing this week in my sprint. I've got the ones that are in the system, but they're not allocated to that sprint tag. They're not a part of the current sprint, but I've committed to doing them. It's just not going to happen this week. And then I have my someday maybes that I haven't committed to. They're ideas or things I might do at some point in the future, but I've not made a commitment to acting on them quite yet. So that's where I have those 3 levels, which is kind of nice because it means that I can create a perspective around that sprint tag and see all of the ones that I'm planning to do this week and just work towards completing that throughout the week, which is kind of handy. So it's not super complex. Again, it's just using the one sprint tag and then the story point tags, and you're done. That's all that does. So anyway, there you go. That's what I'm playing with. It's kind of an experiment right now, but I will say it's giving me just enough structure and enough freedom that I've been really enjoying it this week. Granted, it's still new and shiny. We'll see how it pans out over the next 2 or 3 weeks, especially with Thanksgiving here next week. So we'll see how it all works over the long run. But that's what I'm currently doing.
Nice. Author's style and rating?
Yeah. You want to go first? You want me to?
Well, I'll go. I found that review. It's the most helpful negative review. It's 2 stars, and it says, "Dang, buddy, save some ego for the rest of us." It says, "If I had a nickel for every time he calls someone or something stupid, I'd have at least $100. His ego rivals Kanye West and Donald Trump. Most of the book is, this is why I am the best. This is why I know more than you. If they listened to me, they'd still be a business. If you don't apply Scrum, you're stupid. Like, dang, buddy, save some ego for the rest of us. The Scrum system he developed genuinely seems like it's helpful, and applying it to our everyday work will be beneficial, which is why I gave it 2 stars. But every chapter he says, I'll explain more about Scrum later, which is annoying considering I was reading this book to learn about Scrum, not about the almighty Sutherland achievements. The process seems efficient, but the writing is obnoxious. If he had written a 2-page manual about applying Scrum, he would have accomplished twice the work in half the time." I agree 100% with this review. Well, I should say 95% because I don't agree with the 2-star rating. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. But I will definitely agree with that assessment of the author's style. Definitely got annoying. I think it's a 4-star book. I think there's some great stuff in here. I do think the criticism of when he says, I'll explain more about Scrum later, is valid.
Right.
We talked a lot about Scrum, but we didn't get to the specifics, and that's kind of the feeling you get from reading this book as well. So maybe it's an accurate representation of what was in the book. This definitely gets you excited about Scrum, but when you get done, you do still have questions about, okay, so how do I actually hold a sprint meeting? How should I groom my backlog? Stuff like that. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that, and there's other books for that, but it's kind of weird that the co-creator of Scrum and the savior of the universe doesn't explain how to do it. So yeah, 4 stars because there's some great principles in here, but you could I definitely get why this guy knocked off more than that. And I was tempted to do the same.
Yeah, I'll join you at 4. I definitely agree. If you want to learn how to implement Agile, specifically Scrum, in your specific scenario, this is not the book, which is weird to say.
But it's a great intro. Like, if you've never heard of Scrum before, this is the thing to read.
Yes.
But if you have heard about Scrum, you know what a product owner is, and you want to take it to the next level, this one's not worth your time.
Yes. Yeah. If you know the mechanics of Scrum and such, this is not for you, which is why I would put it at 4. Like, you would expect this to say, here's how Scrum came about, here's how to implement it, in detail without overdoing it, and then show how it could be used both in and out of software development. Like, that would be my expectation here. But really what you get through this is a lot of the why behind each of the pieces, which is interesting, but I don't feel like that was where I expected this to go.
Yep.
Per se. Like, again, it's helpful, but he never sits down and goes through the whole what is Scrum. Like, he tells you what it is from a high level, but he actually doesn't tell you what the process is. He never goes through that.
Yeah. So interesting anecdote. You know, when I first read this book, quote unquote, I read it in an Audible format when I first joined the Asian Efficiency team. And I listened to it and I'm like, okay, I know what Scrum is. And then I've been working with the Asian Efficiency team, been using Scrum for the last several years. I go back and read it now and I'm like, oh, I had no idea what Scrum was.
Yeah.
So totally different perspective after reading it the second time.
Sure. And I will say, like, so at ProCourse, we've been implementing this and slowly bringing up more and more pieces of it. And that's still a fairly new thing to us. So this was good timing that, you know, we were reading this, because it's kind of a good refresher to me, because I know a lot of the pieces to it. It just hadn't, you know, I've not read this previously. I'd studied it through other means. So it was super helpful to do this at this time. So it was a good timing for me, at least. So thanks, Mike.
For sure. Thank you, Bookworm listeners who recommended this.
Oh, yeah, it was a recommendation. I forgot that.
Yep. So I've got a Gap book, and that is Platform by Michael Hyatt for people who are interested in following along with that. And then we've got a couple books that are upcoming here. The next one is your choice.
Yeah, so the next one up, so episode 59, will be by our friend Atul Gawande, Being Mortal. I've started in on this one. I'm very interested in our conversation. It is worlds apart from what we just went through.
Nice.
So
refreshing change of pace.
Yeah, it has to do with our medical system and how we approach end-of-life scenarios in our families. So very interesting. Might get a little morbid here and there in our conversation, but I think it'll be for the better in the long run. So it'll be a very interesting conversation.
All right. The one after that, my wife is making me pick, and that is The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Back in, was it episode 50, we did the draft. I mentioned this was my number one pick, and she was asking me, what book should I read next? I was looking at the things on my bookshelf, and I gave her that one. She's loving it, and she's like, oh my gosh, you have to do this one for Bookworm.
Okay. I've not read it, so this will be good.
It is a really good book. It'll be interesting to see if it's as good as I remember it. Because I haven't read it now in a couple of years, but it's so The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. That's the next one from me.
All right, so no pressure, but you know, as your number one pick, that meant it was above some 5-star books.
I know.
Which means I fully expect you to rate it at 5 stars, and if you don't,
I'm a little bit nervous. I kind of feel like I have to. But no, I'll be honest about it. You know, if I am remembering it through rose-colored glasses and I see a whole bunch of things that I don't like about it, I'll rate it lower than that.
Sure.
That's one of the things you mentioned in the draft episode, was that these ratings, it's interesting to see like the impression we have right after we get done reading the book and the impression 6 months, a year from now. In fact, on the club, there was somebody asking about How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler.
Right.
And that was not a book that I particularly enjoyed, but I responded to that comment and I said, you know, it's interesting how this book has shaped the way that I approach books and the way that I take notes and all of that. I recognize now that book did have a pretty profound impact on me, even though at the time, you know, maybe I thought it was a little bit boring.
Yeah. It's crazy how that particular book, like, it's still a part of some of my own notes that I take for these books that we go through. Like, it definitely impacts the outline that I keep, like the note structure that I keep for myself. So it's interesting how that one's had a big impact, even though I don't think either one of us really liked it. So yeah, interesting.
Got to eat your vegetables.
Yep, that's the way it goes. So that said, Scrum was a book recommendation. It was recommended to us on our Bookworm Club. Very highly rated, or voted, which is why Mike selected it. So if you have a book that you would like to put into the running for that, You can do that on club.bookworm.fm. There's a big button at the top that says recommend. Click it. Make sure you have an account on the club. Click it. And then you can tell us what your book is that you would like to see us go through. At the same time, you can click the recommendations category that's there. It's pretty easy to see that as well. And you can see all of the other books that have been recommended. Go leave your vote on them. Like, let us know which ones you would like us to go through, because other people have recommended them as well. So you can leave your vote on those as well and see what's potentially coming up.
All right. And if you want to help out the show, please go to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. I've mentioned before, I want to be the number one return, not KCRW. I just got salt in the wound the other day because somebody messaged us on the Bookworm Club and said, I love Bookworm by KCRW. I want you to come on the show. And I'm like, wrong Bookworm, people.
And this is how excited we were about that. Neither one of us even acknowledged that it existed.
Well, I haven't had time to respond, but I will. I do want to call out, we've got a couple reviews here, though. I'm just going to read one of them. It says, I recently discovered Bookworm. I've been catching up on past episodes all week long. Whether you read each book or not, Mike and Joe's takeaways are often full of wisdom. Not sure about that, but thanks. And their approach to reading this genre is great to learn from. I never thought to actually write down action items from a book and review my progress on them. Keep up the great work, Mike and Joe. That is from Web1032. It says, a wonderful and inspiring podcast, 5 stars. So thank you so much for that review. On the topic of writing down the action items, you can do that on the club. We would love to see how you are implementing what you read about as you read these books along with us. So go over to club.bookworm.fm to sign up and share your action items there.
Yeah, because Mike and I get to share ours with each other and see how quickly Mike gets down to 4 days a week. We get to share that and keep each other accountable. But if you don't have someone that you get to do that with, you can use the Bookworm community for that. So it can be a great way to get that.
Come hang out with us. Podcast Book Club for the win.
Yeah. Woohoo! Go team. So, yes. That said, let's gear up for our next book, which is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. And we'll go through that one in episode 59.